Chapter 151. The competition was held in the large square in front of the main hall of the cultivation pavilion. There were people everywhere, on the ground, on the trees, on the roofs. Sect head Feng Xiangtian and the other elders stood on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. They looked around and were secretly shocked. Why did so many disciples come to watch? There had been no lack of similar competitions in the past, but it was definitely not as influential as this one. It actually completely surrounded the surroundings. What they didn't know was that other than the disciples from the cultivation pavilion, almost all the disciples from the other factions who had nothing to do had come. Those who had something to do had already finished what they were doing. All of them wanted to see Yu Qianqiu from the alchemy pavilion. It wasn't because Yu Qianqiu had a lot of influence on them, but because Yu Qianqiu's actions were what the other factions wanted to do but didn't dare to do. It was their dream. They were hoping that Yu Qianqiu would be able to break the undefeated legend of the cultivation pavilion on supporting Immortal Island and help them, who were inferior to him, vent their anger. That was all. Many disciples from the other factions who hadn't reached Foundation establishment sighed. They were depressed that they couldn't come out and watch the competition. Around the square, the disciples from the other factions stood together with the people from the cultivation pavilion. The alchemy pavilion had already become the focus of the audience. Even before it appeared, its limelight had already overshadowed the pavilion of cultivation. Who knew how many people were pointing and whispering? The pavilion of cultivation, on the other hand, had become a foil. This made the disciples of the pavilion of cultivation very unhappy. This time, the alchemy pavilion came out in full force. Other than a few disciples who hadn't reached Foundation establishment, everyone else came to support Yu Qianqiu. Even Guan Weiwu stood on the platform of the cultivation pavilion. A few elders walked out of the cultivation pavilion's main hall, led by Dongfang Chonggao. Behind them, a few disciples carried out a few large boxes and lined them up in front of the cultivation pavilion's main hall. The elders each walked in front of a large box. Dongfang Chonggao's voice echoed throughout the square. There are a total of 987 disciples participating in the core formation competition. For fairness, we have decided to draw lots. There are 2 sets of wooden lots numbered from 1 to 493 in these 4 boxes. Those who draw the same number will compete against each other. Because there is only one person, there is a white lot in each box. The disciple who draws the white lot will advance to the second round of the competition. Now, all participating disciples, come and draw lots. Young Qian turned around to look at Yu Qian, who was beside him, and said with a bitter smile, "The 987th place will be decided by drawing lots. You'll have to win at least 7 matches in a row to get into the top 10. You'd better be prepared." Yu Qianqiu smiled indifferently and walked towards the lottery box in the main hall. The moment he walked out, he attracted the attention of tens of thousands of disciples. Almost everyone's head turned towards the direction of the alchemy pavilion. Feng Xiangtian and the others, who were standing on top of the cultivation pavilion, could clearly see the changes in their surroundings. The white faces on both sides of their heads turned to the back of their heads. It was a spectacular sight. Many elders laughed. Elder Mo of the alchemy pavilion said eccentrically, "Old Guan, this disciple of yours is interesting." Guan Weiwu turned his head and stared at him. "What? You're not convinced? If you have the ability, your alchemy pavilion can also pull out a disciple like this." Elder Mo chuckled. "I know myself. Since I know it will be embarrassing to pull him out, it's better if I don't pull him out. The 2 of you are bickering. Can't you see that there are tens of thousands of disciples below?" Sect Master Feng Xiangtian snorted coldly without turning his head back. The 2 principal elders immediately stared at each other without saying a word. Actually, Yu Qianqiu still wanted to keep a low profile. However, all the other disciples had come out from the cultivation pavilion. He was the only one who walked out from the alchemy pavilion. It was impossible for him not to attract attention. Yu Qianqiu looked around. There were bright eyes staring at him everywhere. It was as if he had become a rare animal in the zoo. Damn it! Look, look! I won't collect money. Yu Qianqiu muttered to himself as he slowly walked over. There were nearly 1,000 people waiting to draw lots anyway. There was no hurry. Needless to say, his calm and unhurried demeanor made many people admire him. There were many people, so the people who had drawn lots consciously stood on both sides. Seeing that the lots were almost drawn, Yu Qianqiu found a box with fewer people and stood in line. He slowly approached the box. When it was his turn, he realized that the elder who was holding the box with one hand had used his divine sense to protect the box. Obviously, he was afraid that someone would insert their divine sense into the box to cheat. Yu Qianqiu didn't think about cheating. To him, it was the same no matter who he fought. He reached into the box and found that it was almost empty. His fingers touched one and he grabbed it. After taking it out, he didn't look at it and stood to the side obediently. However, he found that the surrounding disciples were looking at him as if they were demons looking at Tang Seng's flesh. Not long after, the lots were drawn. Dongfang Chang Ao glanced at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "Those who have drawn the white lot, hand over your white lot and wait for the next round of drawing lots." Everyone looked at the lot in their hands and then looked at each other. Yu Qianqiu didn't know the people around him, so he stood there obediently. He didn't believe that his luck was so good that he could draw the white lot from nearly 1,000 people. After a while, no one stood out among the disciples. Everyone looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. Feng Xiangtian's face instantly darkened. He stared at Dongfang Chang Ao and shouted, "Chang Ao, what's going on?" Dongfang Chang Ao bowed to the people upstairs, then turned around and said sternly, "Look at the lots in your hands again. Look carefully." Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt a little bad. Was his luck really so good? How did he get a free lot just like that? He opened the lot in his hand and looked at it from the front to the back. Suddenly, a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. Both sides of this thin piece of wood were smooth. It was difficult to find even the slightest flaw, let alone find the words. It was a good thing to draw the white lot, but it was a little hot in his hand. Wasn't it asking for his life? The joke was a little too much. Did everyone look at the lot in your hand clearly? The disciples who drew the white lot stand out. Dongfang Chang Ao was very depressed. Such a small thing actually caused the sect leader to scold him in front of everyone. "Elder Dongfang, is the lot without words called the white lot?" Someone in the crowd raised a hand and asked weakly. Dongfang Chang Ao said snappily, "Yes." Yu Qianqiu quickly flashed out of the crowd and ran to Dongfang Chang Ao with a white lot in his hand. He handed it over with both hands and said in fear and trepidation, "This disciple really didn't know that the lot without words was a white lot. Elder, please punish me." Everyone almost fainted. The surroundings suddenly became lively and there was endless laughter. Dongfang Chang Ao's face was so gloomy that water could be wrung out. Feng Xiangtian, who was upstairs, saw that the disciple was actually Yu Qianqiu. His mouth opened but he didn't say anything. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were dumbfounded. Elder Mo of the equipment refining pavilion lowered his head and hit his head on the railing. He laughed so hard that he couldn't stand straight. After a while, he gasped and said, "Old Guan, this disciple of yours is too good at torturing people. When has Dongfang Chang Ao been played like this before? Being in the limelight like this will kill people, ah." Chapter 152. Dongfang Chang Ao naturally knew who Yu Qianqiu was. He turned around and looked at the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, do you know where you are?" Is this a place where you can mess around? Since you didn't know anything, I'll forgive you for now. If you do it again, I won't let you off lightly. Yu Qianqiu bowed in gratitude. Chang Ao, let's continue. Dongfang Chang Ao nodded and turned around to look at Yu Qianqiu. He looked around and shouted, Alchemy Pavilion's Yu Qianqiu has drawn the white lot and will advance to the next round of the competition unconditionally. Those who have drawn lots 1 to 10, stay here. The rest of the disciples can leave for now. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu let out a sigh of relief. As if he had been granted amnesty, he jogged back to the alchemy pavilion. Seeing him like this, many people laughed to death. Among the cultivation pavilion's crowd, Gu Qingyun shook his head helplessly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing, who was mixed in the crowd of Wanfen Garden, fell powerlessly on Ko Shuohua's shoulder. She couldn't stop giggling. The other girls also couldn't help but smile. Unfortunately, Furong didn't like crowded places and didn't come this time. Otherwise, who knew what she would think if she saw this? You, sigh. I really don't know what to say to you. Young Qian smiled bitterly as he looked at Yu Qianqiu, who had run back to his side. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands at the alchemy pavilion disciples and said, I really didn't do it on purpose. I've made a fool of myself in front of everyone. I'm really sorry. Everyone revealed a smile of support. After the spectators laughed, they were greatly disappointed. They had come here mainly for Yu Qianqiu. Who would have thought that he would run into him when there was a 1 in 1,000 chance? Who could they go to talk to about this? The plaza was large enough, and it was divided into 10 areas, each supervised by 10 elders. This time, the competition between the 10 pairs of disciples began. The joke just now was also temporarily thrown aside by the crowd, and their attention shifted to the competition. The sword transformed into a stream of light, crisscrossing in all directions. Silhouettes flashed and shouted. For a moment, the entire square was filled with the sound of metal clashing, and there were even sounds of collisions. After the competition, most of the 10 disciples who lost were injured. Some were even carried away with serious injuries. Those who were on good terms with Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but worry for him. Death and injury were allowed in this competition. Naturally, the goal was to allow the participants to display their full strength. Looking at the competition just now, many people had shown mercy. Perhaps it was because they were disciples of the same faction, so it was not good for them to kill. Otherwise, they would not be able to explain themselves when they returned. But for Yu Qianqiu, it would not be so good. Most of the disciples who signed up for the competition were late core formation stage disciples. At the same time, they were also the elites of the cultivation pavilion. Think about it, if there was a large difference in cultivation, they would have already suffered a great loss. Although they were all core formation cultivators, Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 whole layers lower than theirs. If his opponent didn't show mercy, then Yu Qianqiu's situation would be obvious. Yu Qianqiu had also discovered that the closer the cultivation of the 2 disciples, the more dangerous the battle would be. Everyone wanted to win and would often attack with the intention of killing the other. As a result, once the victor was decided, one side would either die or be seriously injured. It was not like when there was a large difference in cultivation. Those with higher cultivation could easily win, so they could control their strength. If the competition continued like this, then a few people would definitely die. Sure enough, in the second round, a disciple's head was cut off by his opponent. The smell of blood spread and seemed to have stimulated the competing disciples. The fighting became more and more intense and both sides often attacked each other to kill. Young Qian looked worriedly at Yu Qianqiu. He saw that Yu Qianqiu's eyes were slightly narrowed. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the cultivation pavilion, frowned. Guan Weiwu called him over and said, Weiwu, although Yu Qianzhou's cultivation was forcibly raised to the core formation stage by Yu, there is still a gap between him and the other disciples. His talent in alchemy is really rare. If something happens to him, it will be a great loss to supporting Immortal Island. What I mean is, should you let him think about it? If it really doesn't work, let him go up and admit defeat. Didn't he draw a blank this round? It's not too late to let him withdraw from the competition now. The elders on the side thought about it and felt that sect leader was right. Yu Qianzhou's alchemy was a secret to others, but most of the people upstairs had seen Yu Qianzhou's alchemy with their own eyes. His talent was really great. If anything happened to him, it would be a great loss for supporting Immortal Island. They couldn't help but nod in agreement with sect leader's opinion. Guan Weiwu was taken aback. Senior brother, wouldn't my alchemy pavilion lose face? Sect leader, I don't think it's necessary. Ferdinand walked over and said with a frown, what's the use of refining elixirs no matter how good he is? If he runs away from a competition with his fellow disciples, I'm afraid he won't be able to raise his head in supporting Immortal Island for the rest of his life. Unless he leaves supporting Immortal Island in the future. In Ferdinand's mind, he didn't want his daughter to follow a waste. Yes. Yes. Guan Weiwu echoed. Feng Xiangtian nodded slightly and turned his attention back to the competition. The elders didn't say anything. Nearly 1,000 people fought nearly 50 matches. A day passed just like that. In the end, most of the people who lost were injured. More than 10 disciples even lost their lives. Yu Qianzhou sat cross-legged on the ground and watched the competition from beginning to end without saying a word. Every time he saw those who killed their opponents, his eyes would unconsciously narrow and remember that person's face. There was no competition that night because it was held during the day. After the competition ended, the disciples of each faction quickly rushed back. If there was anything, they had to quickly finish it tonight. Yu Qianzhou couldn't run away from tomorrow's competition. Because there were 493 disciples who won today and Yu Qianzhou who had advanced in advance, it was just an even number and could be divided into 247 matches. So, it meant that there wouldn't be a situation where there would be a blank lot tomorrow. Tomorrow was really a good day that everyone was looking forward to. The next day, the crowd didn't decrease at all. Their gazes were still focused on Yu Qianzhou who was drawing the lot. Yu Qianzhou touched the lot and held it firmly in his palm after taking a glance. A smile appeared on his lips. His luck wasn't bad. It was a round number. The number was 20. However, he didn't know who his opponent was. When he returned to the Elixir Refinery Pavilion, Yang Qian asked even though he already knew the answer, "Are you done?" Yu Qianzhou nodded. Seeing the worry in his eyes, he couldn't help but smile. Was there really so much to worry about? When he had been cultivating in Utopia, he had often gotten the 3 company commanders in the late-stage nascent soul realm to spar with him. That was not child's play. He was playing with real skills. Why would he be afraid of these disciples in the late-stage core formation realm? Yu Qianzhou calmly watched the competition in front of him. When he realized that his disciple, who had already killed someone yesterday, had actually killed another opponent today, Yu Qianzhou's eyes narrowed into slits, and a cold gleam flashed in them. The surrounding people watched the matches one after another, but they still didn't see Yu Qianzhou go up. They were all a little anxious, but they didn't know what number he had drawn. When Dongfang Chang'ao announced the start of the 20th match of the day, Yu Qianzhou stood up and slowly walked towards the center of the stage. Yang Qian, who was standing to the side, let out a soft, "ah" sound. Immediately, like a stone being tossed into 1,000 ripples, everyone's heads turned around, their gazes all focused on the figure that was slowly walking towards the center of the stage. Chapter 153. The whole place was in an uproar. People were pointing at Yu Qianzhou, who was walking out. The sect leader and others in the attic were a little surprised. Looking at the disciples, they did not expect Yu Qianqiu to have such a great influence. Gu Qingyun was a little excited. Ever since the trial in the demon ghost region, Yu Qianqiu seemed to have become a legend that wasn't a legend. Although the two of them were on good terms, Yu Qianqiu still suppressed Gu Qingyun to the point that he couldn't breathe. Ko Xiuhua and the other girls were also a little excited. So far, those who knew Yu Qianqiu in Fuxian Island had not seen him fight seriously. Their anticipation could be imagined. The 20 disciples gave the lots to Dongfang Cheng Ao. The attention of these disciples was also focused on Yu Qianqiu. Their eyes were fixed on the lot in his hand. It seemed that they were all looking forward to fighting with him. The 10 elders reported the number they needed to supervise, and the disciples followed them to the competition ground. When there was only Yu Qianqiu and another person left in front of the hall, the two of them turned their heads and looked at each other. Needless to say, you and I are opponents. The person who supervised the competition was Elder Sun, who went to the demon ghost region last time. He glanced at the two of them and said loudly, "The one who drew number 200, follow me." After that, he walked to the last competition ground, and the two of them followed him. I say, this guy should work hard. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly and anxiously. There were traces of water on the railing that he had just grabbed. Obviously, his palms were sweaty. Ferdinand, who was standing on the side, glanced at him and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I have paid attention to his opponent. He is not the kind of person who is cruel and merciless. Even if he can't win, it should not be a big deal." Because Yu Qianqiu often went to Wanfen Garden, many disciples of Wanfen Garden knew him. At this time, seeing him standing in the competition ground, they all talked about whether he could win or not. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls turned around and told them with certainty, Yu Qianqiu will definitely be able to do it. The girls' blind worship didn't diminish at all. Ko Xiuhua, on the other hand, was much more rational. After hearing their words, she shook her head slightly. Begin. Dongfang Cheng Ao's voice rang out. The onlookers immediately fell silent. The sounds of fighting immediately rang out. However, this was not what everyone was concerned about. Everyone's attention was on the two people on the 10th stage. However, the two people in the field did not make a move for a long time. The two of them sized each other up for a while and suddenly laughed, causing the surrounding people to feel a little puzzled. Yu Qianqiu's opponent cupped his fists and said with a smile, "I'm Lu Guang, a late-stage core formation cultivator. You must be the legendary Yu Qianqiu who roamed the demon and ghost domain. I've heard so much about you. I didn't think that I would be the first to fight against you. It's an honor. So it's Senior Marshal Brother Lu. I've seen Senior Marshal Brother fight yesterday. I hope Senior Marshal Brother will go easy on me like yesterday." Yu Qianqiu smiled and returned the greeting. He had an impression of this person. He was the only person who didn't injure his opponent in the slightest yesterday. Other than showing that he had a good heart, it could also be seen that his cultivation level was also not bad from the way he attacked. "Are the two of you here to chat or to fight?" Elder Sun, who was in charge of supervising the competition, was a little unhappy. The two of them first stood there for a while, then looked at each other, smiled, and chatted for a while. There were already a few battles in the other fields that had been decided, but the two of them still hadn't made a move. "Please." Lu Guang gestured for his opponent to make the first move. In his mind, there was a gap of 2 levels between their cultivation levels. This was a battle without any suspense. Even if he won, it would be a little unfair. Yu Qianqiu smiled and nodded. His entire aura suddenly changed. Although there was still a smile on his face, it was as if the person standing there wasn't a human, but an immovable mountain, indifferently looking down at the opponent in front of him. Lu Guang suddenly felt suffocated by the aura. He was shocked and the long sword on his back shot out with a clang. He circled around his body and carefully guarded himself. Elder Sun's pupils also suddenly widened as he stared at Yu Qianqiu in surprise. The disciples who were watching the competition also noticed the strangeness here. Feng Xiangtian, who was on the pavilion, suddenly had a flash of light in his eyes. He stared at this place and slowly stroked his long beard. The group of elders also slightly squinted their eyes. At this moment, the other battles had already ended, but they still hadn't made a move. Senior Brother Liu, be careful. The move I'm going to use is called One Sword of No Regrets. Please give me some pointers, Senior Brother Liu. Yu Qianqiu said indifferently, giving Lu Guang a great deal of pressure. He also didn't know why it was like this. His opponent's cultivation was obviously 2 levels lower than his, but he didn't know what he was afraid of. All of a sudden, everyone who was staring at the square seemed to see a flash of light. Before they could figure out what was going on, they saw a bright flying sword pointed straight at Lu Guang's throat. While everyone was silent and shocked, they heard the "ing-ing" sound that could only be heard when a long sword was quickly unsheathed spread throughout the square. Everyone then reacted and was shocked. What a fast speed! The sword was already on his opponent's neck, and they only heard the sound of the sword being unsheathed. Oh my God! How fast was this speed? It was too terrifying. Without a doubt, it had already surpassed the speed of sound transmission. Elder Sun was the closest person to the 2 competitors. With his cultivation, he could clearly see the sword's trajectory, but the speed of the sword was too shocking. Sect Master Feng Xiangtian's hand that was stroking his beard paused, and the group of elders were all stunned. Guan Weiwu's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of disbelief. Feeling the sharpness on his neck, Lu Guang smiled bitterly with a pale face. I've lost. The long sword that was circling around his body slowly returned to its scabbard. Was there still a need to compete? Lu Guang had already shown mercy, or else his head would have been separated from his neck. But this speed was too fast, so fast that he didn't even have the chance to react. Yu Qianqiu withdrew his aura, and his long sword flashed back into its scabbard. He turned to leave. Lu Guang suddenly shouted, Junior Brother Yu, please wait. What's the matter, Senior Brother Liu? Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked. Junior Brother Xiaoyu, please show mercy. Lu Guang dejectedly bowed and asked for guidance. Just now, I heard Junior Brother Yu say that this move is called One Sword Without Regrets. I felt that it was strange. I've never seen this sword technique in the Sutra Pavilion before. Junior Brother Yu, please teach me so that I can understand why I lost. Yu Qianqiu calmly smiled and said, this sword technique was created when I was reading the Sutra Pavilion sword techniques. Senior Brother Liu, there's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank yourself. If it wasn't for Senior Brother Liu having the heart of a Buddha at the center of the competition yesterday, my sword should have no regrets. But in the end, I still regretted it and didn't dare to hurt Senior Brother Liu. Finished speaking, he turned around and walked towards the people from the alchemy pavilion. Lu Guang was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. It seemed that Lu Guang let him go because he didn't hurt anyone yesterday. Otherwise, that sword really would have taken his life. Thinking about it, he felt lucky for his momentary kindness yesterday. At this moment, the people from the cultivation pavilion were silent. The core formation stage disciples were all thinking about whether they could have dodged that sword if they were in Lu Guang's shoes. The other factions were boiling with excitement, as if they had won. Yu Qianqiu's sword had won beautifully. With just one sword, he had defeated the cultivation pavilion's disciple. Finally, they, the inferior disciples who did odd jobs, could vent their anger. Chapter 154. The outcome of the battle was naturally too surprising for everyone. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and laughed, "Not bad, you brat. You didn't waste my effort. Ferdinand's face twitched. He turned his head and sneered, how dare you say that? What effort did you waste? What did you teach this disciple? Guan Weiwu rolled his eyes and snorted, this is between us, master and disciple. Why should I tell you? Ferdinand sneered disdainfully and turned his head to ignore Guan Weiwu. Feng Xiangtian asked the person next to him, what sword skill in the sutra depository is good at speed? Why haven't I heard of it? Is this boy really so talented that he can actually comprehend some sword skill? With their cultivation, they naturally heard the conversation between Yu Qianqiu and Lu Guang. The person next to him had white hair and beard, a calm temperament, and a dignified aura. It was the cultivation pavilion's principal elder, O Sihai. He said calmly, I have never seen any sword skill in the sutra depository that is good at speed. Even if he really comprehended it, so what? Speed? Humph. It's just an unorthodox skill. It's vulnerable in the face of absolute strength. The disciple who was defeated just now was just careless. Feng Xiangtian raised his eyebrows and did not say anything. He looked at the competition venue again. This round had only finished 20 matches. There were still nearly 5 matches left. The next matches had already begun. Most people were still immersed in Yu Qianqiu's match just now. They were obviously a little absent-minded in the following matches. The disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion were even less in the mood to watch. When they saw Yu Qianqiu walking back, they were all in high spirits and happily accepted the envious eyes of the other disciples. After he sat down cross-legged, Yang Qian smiled and said, what else do you have that we don't know? It turns out that you already have a card up your sleeve. We were worried for nothing. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, I was just lucky. My opponent's cultivation is higher than mine. My speed can only be used when he is unprepared. Now that I'm exposed, I'm afraid the next match won't be so easy. Yang Qian thought for a while and nodded slightly. I told you that Yu Qianqiu would be able to do it. Do you see now? I was right. Xiao Wanqing and the others were chatting with a group of female disciples in the Myriad Fragrance Garden. Ko Xiuhua shook her head. With Yu Qianqiu like this, the girls were afraid. The matches were over very quickly. Another dozen people lost their lives. Yu Qianqiu watched each match seriously and found that the ones who killed their fellow disciples were always the same dozen people. They never showed mercy when they attacked. They were all ruthless characters. The second round of matches ended and 247 people were decided. The third round of drawing lots began. This time, there was also a white lot. Yu Qianqiu had learned his lesson and immediately looked at the lot he drew. It was number 36, which was the third match of the third round. It seemed that good luck would not always be on his side. This kind of fight between cultivators would not last too long. Usually, the winner would be decided in less than 10 minutes. Because the arena was divided, the range of movement was restricted. Those who were strong had to win as soon as possible so that they would not be given too much time. Otherwise, how long would it take to fight nearly 1,000 matches from start to finish? Of course, the disciples who were good at fighting were at a disadvantage, but it was a test of their overall strength. After the 2 matches were over, Dongfang Chang Ao announced the preparation for the third match. Yu Qianqiu immediately stood up and handed in the wooden lot. When he arrived at arena number 6, he saw that his opponent was one of the dozen people who were easy to kill. After 2 matches, he had killed 2 people in a row. Yu Qianqiu could not help but squint his eyes. Many people also noticed the situation, and many of them were worried for Yu Qianqiu. As soon as Dongfang Chang Ao announced the start of the match, Yu Qianqiu wanted to bow and ask for his opponent's name. Just as he cupped his fists, his opponent's long sword quickly shot out and slashed at his head. There was no room for negotiation. Yu Qianqiu was taken aback. Fortunately, his flying speed was extremely fast. In an instant, a sword light flashed behind him and directly blocked the flying sword. The flying sword was originally connected to the mind. Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 levels lower than his opponent's. In addition, it happened suddenly and his mind was unstable. How could he resist the opponent's premeditated attack? He only felt that the heavy blow from the sword shook his mind. His chest was stuffy, his throat was sweet, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The sudden change surprised everyone. They did not expect that the Cultivation Pavilion's disciple, who was 2 levels higher than his opponent, would still use a sneak attack. Guan Weiwu, who was on the attic, saw this and was about to fly out to save his disciple, but he was grabbed by Ferdinand who was next to him. Yu Qianqiu was in a trance. His mind had already lost contact with the flying sword, and the flying sword fell to the ground with a clang. The man smiled sinisterly. After shaking off the opponent's sword, he flipped the sword in the air and shot it straight at Yu Qianqiu. At the moment when the connection between the sword and the mind was broken, Yu Qianqiu suddenly woke up. He suddenly felt something was wrong, and his figure quickly dodged. He saw a stream of light rushing into the place where he was just standing. There was a loud bang on the bluestone floor. Stone chips flew everywhere, and a hole was directly blasted on the ground. Yu Qianqiu's figure dodged and stabilized his mind. When his divine sense had just reconnected with the flying sword on the ground, he saw the opponent's figure flashed and stepped on the flying sword on the ground. Yu Qianqiu immediately felt that the connection between his mind and the flying sword was broken again. A cold light flashed again from the hole in the ground and whistled straight over. Yu Qianqiu flipped backwards, and the cold light brushed past his body. However, before he could stabilize his body, he heard a whistling sound behind him. He immediately rolled to the side, and another hole exploded on the ground. The spectators were shocked to the core. Since the start of the competition, this was the first time they had seen someone knock away a flying sword in a single exchange. Thinking about it, it must have something to do with the difference in cultivation between Yu Qianqiu and his opponent. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls were also frightened by the scene in front of them. The scene of Yu Qianqiu controlling 3 swords at the same time in the demon ghost region flashed through Koxiuhua's mind. Her gaze fell on the flying sword that was stepped on, and her tightly furrowed eyebrows relaxed. She didn't know why, but after the attacking flying sword came out from the ground, it floated in the air and didn't attack again. The Cultivation Pavilion's disciple revealed an expression of a cat playing with a mouse. He jokingly said, "You are that Yu Qianqiu, right? You're only at the early stage of core formation, yet you dare to come here to join in the fun. You really don't know what's good for you. If you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, you can wait for the Alchemy Pavilion to collect your corpse." With that said, the flying sword threateningly pointed at Yu Qianqiu in the air and circled twice. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was so angry that he couldn't speak. He rolled up his sleeves and looked like he was going to fight desperately, but he was hugged tightly by Fernand. Yu Qianqiu stood up and spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. Then, he suddenly burst into wild laughter. Contrasting with the bloodstains on his face and clothes, he looked somewhat ferocious as he roared, "Bullshit. I was considering whether or not to give the Cultivation Pavilion some face. Now that the Emperor is here, don't expect me to let you go. You arrogant dog." His voice spread out in all directions. Everyone heard what he said clearly, and they were all stunned. None of them expected Yu Qianqiu to curse in front of so many people. It was truly a disgrace to him. The Cultivation Pavilion's disciple was stunned. He shouted with a livid face, "You're courting death. Courting your mother." Yu Qianqiu immediately shouted back. He made a hand sign and dozens of cold lights flashed out of his storage bag. One of the cold lights turned into a sword and carried him into the air. The other 50 cold lights turned into a sword umbrella and protected his back. Under the bright sun in the sky, the sword umbrella emitted a dazzling golden light. The people around almost couldn't see Yu Qianqiu clearly in the sword circle in the air. Chapter 155. What was going on? The people watching were all dumbfounded. They saw Yu Qianqiu floating majestically in the air like a god, and behind him was a shining golden wheel. Some disciples were positioned at the angle of refraction of the sunlight, and they couldn't open their eyes because of the dazzling light. Feng Xiangtian and the elders in the pavilion looked at each other. No one had seen this kind of sword technique before. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly. The cultivation pavilion's disciples' expression changed. The flying sword sped up and shot toward Yu Qianqiu in the air. Yu Qianqiu coldly snorted and stretched out 2 fingers to point at the sword umbrella. 3 cold lights suddenly shot out from the sword umbrella behind him, clashing with the incoming flying swords. A series of clanking sounds rang out as the 4 flying swords fought in the air. As for the others, there were still a few disciples who had yet to decide a victor in their battles. They all stopped fighting and looked over at the battle over here. The commotion over here was too big. Yu Qianqiu released 3 flying swords. One of them entangled the opponent's flying sword, and they kept clashing head-on. Although his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, he was fast. When one sword was knocked away, the other one would follow up. Of the 3 flying swords, one was always facing off against the opponent's flying sword, while the other 2 would seize the opportunity to strike the opponent's sword with their sharp sword light. It was a bit like the 3 heroes versus Lu Bu. In short, the 3 flying swords trapped the sword, not giving it any chance to escape. This was because his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, so he could only win by outnumbering the opponent. In the beginning, Yu Qianqiu was worried that the opponent's cultivation level was too high, and he would be injured if the flying swords collided with it. After calming himself down a few times, he felt relieved. It was not because of the difference in cultivation level between the 2, but because he was not prepared at the beginning and was successfully ambushed. When he was in Utopia, this situation did not happen when he was sparring with the 3 company commanders who were at the late nascent soul stage. It was purely because he was careless. However, this provided a very good way for him to fight in the future. Sneak attacks were definitely a good choice. Now that he had nothing to worry about, it was time to deal with this guy. Yu Qianqiu looked down and cackled, "You dog, see how I'll deal with you." He stretched out 2 fingers and pointed with the driving sword art. The sword umbrella behind him released 2 rays of cold light that flew towards the cultivation pavilion's disciple. After being tricked by him just now, Yu Qianqiu also had thoughts of revenge. The 2 beams of cold light did not kill the opponent very quickly, and the opponent always managed to dodge it. That person was rolling on the ground and jumping around. Just as his figure flashed, the flying sword pierced a hole in the ground. As for the sword that he stepped on just now, Yu Qianqiu kept it for his own use. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of explosions rang out one after another. There was not a single piece of limestone laid on the 6th stage that was left intact. There were potholes everywhere. That person was immediately forced into a difficult situation by the 3 flying swords. His initial arrogance and complacency had long since disappeared. Right now, he was desperately running for his life. In the eyes of the bystanders, he was even more frightened and in a precarious situation. He didn't know when he would be slaughtered. His appearance was indeed a bit shameful. "Dog, if you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, just wait for the cultivation pavilion to collect your corpse." "Kaka." Yu Qianqiu laughed arrogantly. He completely threw that person's words back at him. After a round of torture, that disciple did indeed have thoughts of admitting defeat. However, he couldn't kneel down and admit defeat even if he was beaten to death. If he really did that, he feared that the cultivation pavilion would no longer be able to tolerate him. At this moment, the people with the most complicated feelings were none other than the disciples of the cultivation pavilion. Each and every one of their faces sank. When did a main faction disciple get forced into this state by a subsidiary faction disciple? This was truly a disgrace to the cultivation pavilion. Gu Qingyun's expression was indescribably gloomy. From the standpoint of a friend, he should hope that Yu Qianqiu would win. From the standpoint of reputation, he naturally hoped that the main faction disciple would win. After all, he was a member of the cultivation pavilion, and if he lost face, he would also be implicated. Thinking a little more, Gu Qingyun gnashed his teeth in anger. That fellow was truly hateful. Leaving aside the fact that he sneak attacked, it was fine if he took advantage of Qin Wendian at the start. But why did he have to say such harsh words? Now, Qin Wendian had sent his words back to Gu Qingyun. Gu Qingyun didn't even have a path to retreat. If it was a normal win or loss, then no one would say anything. Just like Lu Guang at the beginning. But things had become like this. The two of them bullied and scolded each other, implicating the two factions behind them. Right now, it was no longer a matter of two people, but a matter of the reputation of the two factions. It was a matter of life and death, and no one could take a step back. The majority of the disciples of the cultivation pavilion had the same thoughts as Gu Qingyun. The disciples of the other factions were extremely excited. Yu Qianqiu had really made the subsidiary factions proud. The number 6 arena was still rumbling non-stop. The arena with a radius of tens of meters was already much shorter than the surrounding area. That disciple was also suffering in silence. He was still fleeing in all directions, and his whole body was already covered in sweat. Seeing that he refused to admit defeat, Yu Qianqiu sneered and prepared to kill him. However, from the beginning, he had no intention of letting him go, even though he had already admitted defeat. Bastard, I don't want to play with you anymore. Hand over your life. Yu Qianqiu shouted loudly. He pointed with his finger and the dazzling sword will behind him split into 10 rays of sword light. Xiu xiu. The rays of sword light quickly rushed down. Ah! That disciple suddenly shouted and raised his hand. A golden bracelet on his wrist flashed with a golden light. In an instant, that golden light enveloped his entire body. More than 10 rays of cold light that were shooting at high speed collided with the bracelet, making ding-ding-dang-dang sounds. One after another, they were all knocked away. F***CK. What is this? Yu Qianqiu looked down in a daze. The surrounding people were also in an uproar. Diamond bracelet. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was startled at first. Then, he turned his head and said angrily, Elder O, what is the meaning of this? How can you allow a disciple to bring a magic weapon into the arena? This is too unfair to the other disciples. O Sihai glanced at him and said expressionlessly, who said that magic weapons can't be brought into the arena? Who allowed your alchemy pavilion disciple to bring so many flying swords into the arena? Isn't this unfair to the other disciples? That's because of the sword technique he cultivates. He can control so many flying swords at the same time, so it doesn't matter if he brings more flying swords. Guan Weiwu defended himself. His own disciple was about to win, but the other side actually brought out a magic weapon. How could he not be angry? That diamond bracelet wasn't given to him by the cultivation pavilion. When he went out to cultivate, he killed a demonic path disciple and obtained it with his own ability. Why can't he use something that belongs to him? O Sihai sneered, then suddenly turned his head and said in a deep voice, Guan Weiwu, who gave you the right to speak to me like this? Guan Weiwu was stunned. O Sihai's cultivation had reached the peak of the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage. He was a bit stronger than the sect leader. According to seniority in the outside world, he was his father's junior brother. He was a generation older than the sect leader and belonged to the same branch of the Guan family. Senior brother. You be the judge. Guan Weiwu didn't dare to show his power and could only look for his senior brother, the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian looked down, paused, and said, "A magic weapon obtained with one's own ability is naturally a part of one's strength. This is fair to everyone. The two of you don't need to argue anymore." Although the last sentence seemed to be reprimanding the two of them, in general, it was obvious that he was on Osihai's side. "Yes, sect leader." Osihai responded with a smile and looked down without saying anything. Guan Weiwu's face twitched, but he also had nothing to say. Chapter 156. After the disciple was enveloped by the golden light barrier, he let out a breath and his expression gradually calmed down. Yu Qianqiu didn't believe it and controlled his flying sword to attack again. After a series of clanging sounds, the thin, transparent barrier didn't react at all. What a powerful magic treasure! The disciples of the various factions felt that it was a pity. Yu Qianqiu was about to win, but his opponent actually came up with such a thing. Xiao Wanqing turned to Ko Shuahua and asked, "Marshal and Co., what is that egg-shaped light barrier? It has such a strong defense. I think Yu Qianqiu's flying sword can't do anything to it." Ko Shuahua stared at the location of the competition and frowned. It's the Vidra bracelet, a top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure. The light barrier it emits is called the Vidra barrier. As long as the cultivator using this treasure has enough vitality, even an early-stage tribulation-passing cultivator won't be able to break it. I just don't know how such a magic treasure fell into the hands of a late-stage core formation cultivator. Ah! A top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure. Xiao Wanqing was stunned. Even in a large sect like the supporting Immortal Island, only nascent soul cultivators could get a low-grade magic treasure. Usually, it was only an offensive magic treasure. A top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure could almost be considered a low-grade high-grade magic treasure. It should be known that magic treasures that could protect one's life were very difficult to refine. Not everyone had the opportunity to obtain one. With one in hand, it wouldn't be a problem to protect one's life. After all, in the cultivation world, as long as you weren't too unlucky, you wouldn't always encounter mid-stage tribulation-passing opponents. The disciple in the barrier took out a handful of chi recovery pills and put one in his mouth. He stared at Yu Qianqiu with a gloomy expression. Xiao Wanqing said regretfully, "He still has chi recovery pills. It seems that even Yu Qianqiu can't do anything to him." In each faction, there were seniors like Ko Shuahua who knew what was good for them. Soon, the news that the disciple was using the Vidra bracelet spread. Everyone felt that it was a pity. It seemed that no one could do anything to the other. After Yu Qianqiu struck the light barrier for a while, he lost his temper and couldn't help but curse, "You coward. If you have the guts, then come out and fight me fair and square. What are you hiding in there for? You shameless thing." A grand late core formation disciple is actually scared of an early core formation cultivator like this. If you have the guts, then get the hell out here. How could the true cultivation pavilion produce trash like you? Damn it. Damn it. Aside from sneak attacks, you only know how to hide like a turtle. Today, I've learned the skills of the cultivation pavilion. The disciple looked at Yu Qianqiu with resentment and cursed loudly. He clenched his fists so hard that they made popping sounds. Even if he left the competition alive today, he wouldn't have the face to see anyone after being tormented by Yu Qianqiu like this. After the impulse, he calmed down. However, his expression was frighteningly gloomy. After all, his life was more important. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't have to worry about not having a chance to take revenge. The disciples of the cultivation pavilion who were watching from the sidelines were so angry at Yu Qianqiu that they gnashed their teeth. If he cursed, then so be it. Why did he have to curse the entire cultivation pavilion? Those words were too hurtful. All the elders in the pavilion looked at each other in dismay. They had never seen such a thing happen in all the previous competitions, and they had never seen a disciple like Yu Qianqiu who didn't even have the least bit of pretense, and was like a shrew who threw a tantrum in public. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were a little dumbfounded. The former had never seen this side of his disciple. It was really too much. The latter did not expect his future son-in-law to be like this. Although he had seen Yu Qianqiu act shamelessly in the 10,000 fragrance garden, he had never seen such a shameless act in public. Oh, Sihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. As the principal elder of the cultivation pavilion, how could he be happy when he saw someone pointing at the cultivation pavilion's nose and cursing like this, let alone in front of so many people? He turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Guan Weiwu, is this your personal disciple?" That elder, oh, he might have been muddled by the sneak attack of your disciple. I will definitely scold him when I get back. While Guan Weiwu was apologizing, he heard his disciple on the other side was still cursing without restraint. His vulgarities were increasing, and the more he cursed, the uglier it was. Guan Weiwu smiled apologetically and wiped his forehead. Feng Xiangtian also frowned. His lips moved a few times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. This competition was originally for the disciples to fight with their lives. To put it bluntly, no matter what method you used to win, it was still a part of your strength. His disciple almost lost his life in the beginning, so a few curses like this was nothing. It was just that it was indeed a little outrageous. The disciples of the various sects had seen it today. A competition could actually be like this. They did not know if Yu Qianqiu had won glory for the auxiliary disciples today or if he had lost face. All of them were speechless as they listened to him cursing in different ways. Gu Qingyun, who was in the cultivation pavilion's crowd, was dumbfounded and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing's small red lips froze for a while before she turned to look at the crowd and said embarrassedly, "Is that really Yu Qianqiu?" She really did not expect that the mighty and omnipotent Yu Qianqiu in her heart would actually have this side to him. It completely overturned her image in her heart. Those people that Yu Qianqiu had saved from the demon ghost region were the same. Was this still the same Yu Qianqiu who sang and played the zither in the demon ghost region and chatted cheerfully with the ghost general? Bastard, coward, son of AB*****. Yu Qianqiu stood in the air for a long time and cursed for a long time. Seeing that the other party was not moved by his provocation, he finally stopped. He immediately felt his true essence was a little exhausted and his mouth was a little dry. He immediately took out a handful of energy recovery pills and stuffed them all into his mouth like candy. After recovering his true essence, he held his chin and flew around the Vidra barrier a few times. Suddenly, he slapped his forehead as if he had suddenly realized something and reached his hand into his storage bag. This made the disciple below nervous, not knowing what he was going to do. Yu Qianqiu took out a few yellow talismans and laughed sinisterly. How could he have forgotten about the astral breaching talismans made by Chen Feng? He had wasted so much saliva. Whether it was useful or not, he had to try it first. He took out a talisman with 2 fingers and slowly raised it up. It immediately attracted everyone's attention. The disciple immediately felt that something was wrong. He immediately poured a large amount of true essence into the Vidra bracelet. The golden light barrier immediately became golden, clearly strengthening its defensive capabilities. A yellow light shot out from Yu Qianqiu's hand towards the Vidra barrier. With a loud bang, the disciple and the barrier were blasted several times. When he crawled up with a face full of fear, he found that the Vidra barrier was not damaged at all. He could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Damn! How can it be so sturdy? Again. Yu Qianqiu threw the astral breaching talismans one after another, causing a series of loud booms. The spectating disciples were speechless. Fernan, who was in the pavilion, frowned. It seems like the astral breaching talisman that can break nascent soul stages' true chi. Where did this kid get it? Elder Mo, who was a few steps away, shook his head with both hands on the railing. That disciple was vicious in the previous 2 rounds. This time, he has met his nemesis. With his cultivation, I'm afraid that he will not be in a good state even if he does not get injured. Guan Weiwu, who was standing at the side, smiled. He was too embarrassed to continue protecting his disciple. Yu Qianzhou had a total of 6 astral breaching talismans. After using them all at once, he realized that they still could not do anything to him. The defense of the light barrier was too good. The disciple was blasted to the ground 6 times in a row. His face was deathly pale. Fortunately, he wasn't injured. He stared at his opponent in the air as if his eyes were about to burst into flames. He raised his hand and stuffed another energy recovery pill into his mouth. What are you looking at? If you are not convinced, come out if you have the guts. Yu Qianzhou was very annoyed by his gaze. If he did not take the opportunity to kill him this time, he did not know what kind of revenge he would attract in the future. He immediately shouted, "An iron rod can be ground into a needle. I don't believe that I cannot break your tortoise shell." He put his palms together and his 10 fingers turned to form a shadow. It was as bright as a lotus flower. Dozens of cold lights appeared from his storage bag. The flying swords on his back also flashed. Nearly 100 flying swords danced in the air at the same time. It was a spectacular scene. Everyone had never seen a person control so many flying swords at the same time. They all stared at the sky in shock. Chapter 157. Yu Qianzhou floated in the air on his sword with a ruthless look on his face. Cold lights and shadows were everywhere around him, dancing all over the sky. When Yu Qianzhou moved in the air, there were nearly 100 cold lights following him. Every time his limbs moved, the sword shadows in the sky would be in a commotion. Everything was under his control, and his momentum was extraordinary. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the attic, suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, "If I remember correctly, there seems to be a set of sword skills in the Sutras depository called Guiyuan sword skill. The higher the cultivation, the more flying swords you can control. Yu Qianzhou should be practicing this set of sword skills." Oh Sihai, who was beside him, nodded, then shook his head and said, "The Guiyuan sword skill doesn't seem to be so fast and powerful. Otherwise, many disciples would have practiced it." Feng Xiangtian's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "I'm afraid it has been modified by him." If that's the case, then this Yu Qianzhou's cultivation talent is really extraordinary. Oh Sihai frowned and did not say anything. He did not believe what the head said. Modified the cultivation method. What a joke. The person who was most familiar with the cultivation method was the creator of the method. How could other people who practiced this method change it randomly? Unless he was not afraid of death or qigong deviation. In fact, both Feng Xiangtian and O Sihai were right. However, the latter did not know that when Yu Qianzhou was modifying this sword technique, there were indeed many times when he almost went berserk. However, whenever his body was damaged or about to collapse, the golden bead in his body would display its miraculous effect, constantly repairing and maintaining his body. That was why Yu Qianzhou, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, changed this sword technique of Guiyuan into his own unique sword technique. As for his talent in cultivation, it probably had nothing to do with it. All the people who were familiar with Yu Qianzhou were stunned. They did not know how many more secrets this guy had. In short, once he did it, it was very eye-catching. Just when everyone was guessing what he was going to do, Yu Qianzhou stretched out 2 fingers and drew 2 circles in the air. Close to 100 flying swords followed his gestures and split into two, forming two circles of swords behind him. In the eyes of the surrounding people, it was as if he had grown a pair of glowing wings on his back. The disciple hiding in the Vidra barrier panicked once more. Although the astral breaker talismans did not harm him, the explosion had caused his blood and chi to churn, making him feel unbearably uncomfortable. It took him a long time to calm down, but from the looks of it, the fellow in the sky was going to do something again. It was a matter of life and death, so it would be strange if he was not afraid. The light barrier protecting him became golden again. Quick! Yu Qianqiu shouted at the two circles of swords behind him. One of the two circles of swords behind him suddenly broke off, forming two long dragons on the left and right, pouncing toward the golden egg below. Immediately, a series of clanking sounds of metal colliding rang out. As the clanking sounds rang out, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers again. The two sword dragons once again formed two circles, connecting with each other in a circulatory cycle manner. They kept colliding with the golden egg, and the rapid and sharp sounds of collision rang out. This scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, as if the two wings on Yu Qianqiu's body had grown onto the golden egg below. Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers and pointed down. The two high-speed circles of swords immediately sped up, turning into two beams of light. The sounds of collision were no longer rapid, but a continuous, sharp, ear-piercing sound. After listening for a while, the crowd felt a sense of irritation in their chests. They felt flustered and immediately circulated their qi to resist. Yu Qianqiu looked down with a determined expression. He took out a handful of qi recovery pills and stuffed them into his mouth. Damn it! I'm going to drag it out with you today. I don't believe that this turtle shell can protect you forever. Everyone could see that he wanted to fight a protracted battle, but the noise was really disturbing and uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that the disciple in the light barrier was suffering 1,000 times more than the crowd. The sharp, bone-piercing sound was right beside his ears. He couldn't hide even if he wanted to. He could only sit down cross-legged and circulate his qi to resist. Elder Mo of the Artifact Refining Pavilion, who was on the pavilion, asked in surprise, "Old Guan, what is your disciple doing?" Guan Weiwu turned around and rolled his eyes at him. He thought to himself, "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" After a while, Elder Mo suddenly shouted, "Oh no, look at the disciple in the Vidra barrier." The people on the pavilion looked over. It was so far away that they couldn't see clearly. They immediately circulated their qi to take a closer look. When they saw clearly, they were all shocked. The disciple's face was pale and his body was trembling non-stop. His eyes, mouth, nose, ears, and other orifices were bleeding. His appearance was dispirited and miserable. It was obvious that he was injured. How could this be? Feng Xiangtian was also shocked. The group of elders looked at each other in dismay. Even with their cultivation and knowledge, no one could tell how Yu Qianqiu had injured that disciple. In fact, Yu Qianqiu himself didn't know what was going on. He was the closest to the disciple, so he was the first to notice the abnormality. At first, he saw that the disciple was shivering in the turtle shell. He didn't pay much attention to it. When he noticed that something was wrong, he focused and saw that the disciple was bleeding from his orifices. What was going on? After a while, Yu Qianqiu came to a realization. It was probably the high-intensity noise he made that injured the disciple. No matter what, he was someone who had lived in the technological era for so many years in his previous life. Of course, he knew that the sound waves produced by noise could also kill people. Damn! It was a lucky hit. So it was like this. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. The speed of the flying sword was raised to the limit. The ear-piercing sound made the people around them feel disturbed. Yu Qianqiu stared at the disciple's reaction in the turtle shell. When he saw that the disciple was shaking even more violently, he knew that he had guessed correctly. He stuffed another chi recovery pill into his mouth and thought, "Bastard, let's see how long you can resist." Not long after, everyone suddenly noticed that the light emitted by the Vajra shield was flickering. Even the disciples in the early stage of foundation establishment could see that something was wrong. Yu Qianqiu sneered again and again. He could clearly see that the person inside was not only bleeding from his 7 orifices, but even his pores were oozing blood. Yet, he was still stubbornly resisting. It seemed that he was not far from death. Everyone in the attic naturally saw this. Elder Mo sighed and said, "I'm afraid it's almost over." Everyone had their own thoughts and were silent. Only O Sihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. Ah! Suddenly, the surroundings boiled. The Vajra shield on the cultivation pavilion disciple's body suddenly disappeared. His whole body was finally exposed. He was covered in blood and fell to the ground. Bang! Yu Qianqiu's face was full of joy as he shouted. After waiting for a long time, he finally succeeded. If he didn't act now, then when would he? He understood the principle of delay. Nearly 100 cold lights swarmed toward the disciple like a flock of crows fighting for food. Now everyone knew that the disciple was dead for sure. O Sihai, who was in the attic, slammed his palm on the railing. His lips were tightly shut and his face was gloomy. He didn't say a word. Feng Xiangtian glanced at him and didn't say anything. On the other hand, Guan Weiwu was a bit like a thief. His disciple defeated his opponent, but he didn't show any joy. Instead, he secretly looked at the people on both sides. With a burst of blood mist, the flying swords completed their mission. They turned into cold lights and flashed back into Yu Qianqiu's storage pouch. When the blood mist dissipated, there was nothing left except a pool of blood on the ground. Yu Qianqiu floated to the ground. The long sword under his feet fell into his hand. He walked to the pool of blood, picked up the bloody bracelet with his sword, and put it into his storage pouch. He casually threw the sword back into the scabbard on his back and walked toward the alchemy pavilion disciples as if nothing had happened. Chapter 158. Silence. The surroundings were very quiet. Everyone was still immersed in the moment when the flying sword dismembered the body. No one could have imagined that a flying sword could be used to such a bloody extent that not even a piece of flesh or bone could be found. The most frightening thing was that with Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, he was actually able to break the middle-grade defensive magic treasure, the Vajra bracelet. No one could see how he did it. In any case, the person inside was killed by him just like that. The first to wake up were the supervising elders. Because Yu Qianqiu's matches were too eye-catching, there were still a few matches that hadn't been decided and had already stopped. At this moment, under the reprimand of the elders, the matches continued. However, no one dared to kill each other anymore. Yu Qianqiu's previous actions were already very clear. Those who wanted to kill him had better not meet him, or else the consequences would be very tragic. Lu Guang and that disciple were in stark contrast. The former was unharmed while the latter's bones couldn't even be found. This competition was decided by drawing lots. Who could guarantee that they wouldn't meet Yu Qianqiu? Who still thought that they could beat Yu Qianqiu with their late core formation cultivation? In the end, the remaining people competed peacefully. After the winners and losers were decided, nothing happened. The spectators, on the other hand, felt that it wasn't intense enough and lacked interest. After the match was over, someone immediately came to the competition venue to repair the ground that had been smashed. The atmosphere over at the cultivation pavilion was oppressive. The disciples who were about to compete were all secretly thinking about who would be unlucky enough to meet Yu Qianqiu. Those who had killed in the previous 2 matches were even more nervous. Xiao Wanqing, who was on the 10,000 fragrance garden side, felt that something was wrong. She didn't say anything and smiled like a flower. Her eyes flickered as she looked at the disciple who had just won. Her expression was worth thinking about. In reality, she wasn't the only one looking over. There were too many disciples from each faction to count. It was just that their gazes were different from hers. The disciples of the alchemy pavilion all looked as if they were on steroids. They stood there in high spirits as if they were afraid that others wouldn't know they were disciples of the alchemy pavilion. Yang Qian grinned and said, "You Qianqiu, you sure hit it well." "What? Are you going to defeat all the disciples of the cultivation pavilion?" Hearing this, the nearby disciples all gathered their heads, wanting to hear how Elder Guan's direct disciple would answer. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and said modestly, "Martial Uncle Yang thinks too highly of me, I was just lucky just now." The cultivation pavilion is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It's already not bad if I can enter the top 10. Ha! Martial Uncle Yu is too modest. That's right. Martial Uncle, don't stand on ceremony when the time comes. When it's time to strike, strike. This Martial Uncle Yu was usually very amiable and did not put on any airs. At this moment, the disciples from the alchemy pavilion were laughing and fanning the flames, causing the disciples from the other factions to be filled with envy. Disciples participating in the fourth round, draw lots. Dongfang Chang Ao shouted. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands at the crowd, and as usual, walked over leisurely. Many of the disciples sighed in their hearts. Looking at how calm he was, it seemed he already had a card up his sleeve. This was the demeanor of an expert, this was the demeanor of a master. After 3 rounds of the competition, those who relied on luck or coincidence were almost all eliminated. The remaining people were definitely late core formation stage experts. Yu Qianqiu looked at the remaining 100 people and was slightly stunned. He found that they were all standing next to the lottery box and looking at him, not knowing what to do. While Yu Qianqiu was confused, Dongfang Chang Ao looked at the disciples in front of him and said in a low voice, "Yu Qianqiu, come here and draw lots." "Ah! Oh!" Yu Qianqiu quickly ran over. No matter what the reason was, he had already offended the old guy, so he couldn't do it again. Just as his hand was about to reach into the lottery box, someone suddenly shouted from upstairs, "Wait, Chang Ao, bring Yu Qianqiu up here." The 2 people who were called looked up and saw it was the sect leader, Feng Xiangtian. Yu Qianqiu was stunned again and then followed Dongfang Chang Ao into the cultivation pavilion's main hall. When he climbed to the top floor, he saw the sect leader and the other elders and quickly bowed. In his heart, he was trying to figure out why he was called up. All the old guy's attention was on Yu Qianqiu. Feng Xiangtian gently waved his hand and said, "Chang Ao, pass on my decree. Yu Qianqiu is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to compete. You can go down first." Dongfang Chang Ao paused. This was completely against the rules of the competition, but since the sect leader said it was a decree, there was no problem. He immediately clasped his hands and said, "Yes, sect leader." Then he left. What are these old guys doing? While Yu Qianqiu was puzzled, Dongfang Chang Ao's voice came from below. "Pass on the sect leader's decree. Yu Qianqiu is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to draw lots." At first, there was an uproar outside, but then it quieted down. Everyone thought about it and agreed. With Yu Qianqiu's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter the top 10. To put it bluntly, there was no one left who could deal with his pile of flying swords. The remaining disciples were relieved when they heard this. Without that guy, it would be much safer. However, he didn't know that sect head Feng Xiangtian had other considerations. The pavilion of cultivation had been the foundation of supporting Immortal Island for thousands of years. If they continued to compete and were defeated by Yu Qianqiu along the way, then they would be in big trouble. The pavilion of cultivation would lose all of its face. Therefore, he decided to not let him compete in the later rounds and use his authority as the sect head to let him directly enter the top 10. The group of old guys knew that after watching 2 rounds, none of the cultivation pavilion's core formation stage disciples were Yu Qianqiu's opponent. They naturally knew the sect leader's intention. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianqiu and smiled. Yu Qianqiu, don't think too much. I will ask you a few questions, and you have to answer me honestly. Can you do that? Yu Qianqiu's brain turned a few times. He bowed and said, since the sect leader is asking, I will tell you everything I know. Very good. Feng Xiangtian nodded and smiled. Then let me ask you. The sword technique you practice is very powerful. What is it called? Where did it come from? Yu Qianqiu had thought of these questions a long time ago. Since he took it out to show off, he knew that this day would come sooner or later, so he was well prepared to deal with it. He replied respectfully, the sword technique I practice comes from the Sutra Pavilion. It is called the Guiyuan sword technique, but... He paused and continued, but during the process of practicing, I found that there were some flaws in this technique. Therefore, I spent a lot of effort to improve it. I don't know if it is still the Guiyuan sword technique. He wasn't clear about these things and didn't know what the consequences of saying these things would be. Everyone immediately gasped. This kid really changed the sword technique to practice. Such talent. Even those who have reached the final stage of the passing calamity stage wouldn't dare to casually change a technique to practice. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. The Guan clan has produced another talent. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand looked at each other with indescribable feelings. Feng Xiangtian smiled and revealed an as expected expression. He continued to ask, how many flying swords can you control now? Where did these flying swords of yours come from? I have already reached the limit of flying swords I can control today. There are a total of 100 flying swords. As for the flying swords, I practiced the sword technique to a certain stage and didn't have any more flying swords to use, so I almost gave up on practicing this sword technique. In the end, I used up the 1,000 upper spiritual stones that the sect leader gave me. The flying swords were bought by senior brother Qingjingxing from the Secular Objects Hall. Yu Qianqiu looked like he had no choice but to do so. I see. Feng Xiangtian nodded and glanced at Guan Weiwu expressionlessly. He was furious. Yu Qianqiu started with alchemy and reached the early stage of the core formation stage in just a few years. Now, he even created his own cultivation technique. Such talent was rare in the cultivation world. This muddle-headed master didn't know anything. Because he didn't have any flying swords to use, he almost forced me to give up on studying this sword technique. If I really gave up, who would see such a powerful sword technique on Fuxian Island today? This muddle-headed thing. Elder Mo, Yu Qianqiu can go to the equipment refining pavilion to get the magic tools he lacks for cultivation in the future. Try to cooperate if you can. Feng Xiangtian's voice was a little gloomy. Chapter 159. Yes, sect leader. After Elder Mo responded, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, it's a pity to stay in the elixir refinery pavilion with such cultivation talent. It's better to transfer you to the cultivation pavilion. Yu Qianqiu didn't know how to answer this question, so he obediently pretended not to hear it. Oh Sihai, who originally had a gloomy expression, raised his eyebrows inadvertently. He looked up and down at Yu Qianqiu and thought to himself, that's right. Why didn't I think of it? With such cultivation talent, he should come to my cultivation pavilion. Isn't hiding in the elixir refinery pavilion a waste of talent? Besides, it's not shameful for a disciple to compete with another disciple. Oh Sihai's expression relaxed, and he started to have ideas about Yu Qianqiu. We all saw that disciple die under your sword just now. However, before the Vajra shield broke, that disciple had already bled to death. What magic art did you use? Feng Xiangtian asked again. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and smiled. I didn't use any magic art. He died from being noisy. Noisy to death. Are you kidding me? The group of old guys exchanged glances. Nonsense. Oh Sihai said coldly. Sigh. A bunch of illiterates. Seeing that they didn't believe him, Yu Qianqiu bowed to Oh Sihai and said, If Elder O doesn't believe me, would you like to accompany me to do an experiment? Elder O will understand once you try. How do I do it? Oh Sihai took a few steps forward. There was a large bell hanging low on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. Yu Qianqiu saw it when he came up. He walked in front of the bell and shook the baton to hit the bell. Dong! A dull and distant sound came from the top of the building. Everyone downstairs looked up, not knowing what was going on up there. Yu Qianqiu pointed to the bell with a little embarrassment and said, Elder O, can you bend down and stand in the bell for a while? Without saying a word, Oh Sihai bent down and stood in the bell, shouting, You try, dong. Before he finished speaking, the bell had been rung by Yu Qianqiu. From the bottom of the bell, Oh Sihai's body could be seen trembling. After the buzzing sound stopped, Yu Qianqiu said with respect, Elder O, you can come out now. After waiting for a while, Oh Sihai came out with a strange look on his face. He hadn't prepared anything just now, so he was immediately shocked by the sound of the bell. Elder O, what's wrong with you? Everyone asked when they saw his strange expression. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed in his heart. The old man must be suffering. Oh Sihai shook his head and said dully, It was so loud. I wasn't prepared and almost fainted. Guan Weiwu walked to the front of the bell and knocked it twice. He said hesitantly, The sound is indeed loud, but it shouldn't be enough to make people faint. Old Phil, I'll go in and try. You knock it and see. After that, he also went in. Ferdinand rolled his eyes and walked over angrily. He shook the pestle and hit it hard. Plop. Guan Weiwu sat on the ground, covered his ears with his hands and rolled out. He climbed up shakily, but he was still a little unsteady. After a long time, he calmed down and exhaled, so powerful. At this time, everyone knew that what Yu Qianqiu said was true, but they still didn't understand the reason. After all, they and Yu Qianqiu's ideas were completely different, so it was understandable. Feng Xiangtian pondered and said, Yu Qianqiu, do you mean that the disciple died because of your noise? Yes. Yu Qianqiu said respectfully, that disciple was hiding inside the Vajra barrier. I used my flying swords to continuously attack it. The sound he heard inside was 1,000 times louder than what we heard outside. After a while, no one would be able to endure it. Naturally, he was shaken to death. Yu Qianqiu had originally wanted to explain to them what noise and sound waves were, but after thinking about it, he figured that they wouldn't understand, so he didn't say anything. It was enough to let them understand the general meaning, so that they wouldn't be long-winded. Everyone looked at each other. It was the first time they knew that sound could kill. Feng Xiangtian nodded and said, Yu Qianqiu, why do you want to participate in this competition? Yu Qianqiu said respectfully, I want to go out and broaden my horizons. Then you should know that the outside is not like the inside of Fuxian Island. There are dangers at all times. Aren't you afraid? Feng Xiangtian said. How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain? I'm not afraid. Yu Qianqiu replied solemnly. The group of old guys nodded. Feng Xiangtian smiled and said, "How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain?" "Well said, hee. Yu Qianqiu, you can leave first." Yu Qianqiu bowed to everyone and was about to leave. Sihai said, "Yu Qianqiu, the Vidra bracelet belongs to a disciple of the cultivation pavilion. It should be taken back. Seeing that you are going out to gain experience, the cultivation pavilion will give it to you to protect yourself." Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thanked him and left. The group of elders stared at Sihai strangely. Elder Mo said, "Elder O, when did you become so generous?" Sihai glared at him and ignored him. He followed the sect leader to stand in front of the railing to watch the competition below. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianqiu walking away and sighed. Through this conversation, he was very fond of Yu Qianqiu. At such a young age, with such talent, his future was limitless. Unfortunately, he was not his own personal disciple. Thinking of this, he glanced at Guan Weiwu and sighed in his heart. Since the following competition had nothing to do with him, Yu Qianqiu was too lazy to watch anymore. He said goodbye to the disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion and left the Cultivation Pavilion's territory. He flew straight to the Alchemy Pavilion on his sword. When the other disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion saw that Yu Qianqiu had left, they also felt that there was no point in the competition and left. The disciples of each faction also came for Yu Qianqiu. When the main character left, they all left one after another. The entire square was suddenly left with the Cultivation Pavilion performing a one-man show. The group of old guys in the Alchemy Pavilion finally understood who the main character of this competition was. In the following days, Yu Qianqiu did not watch any of the finals and nascent soul stage competitions. He did what he was supposed to do. He did not know that his name had once again spread throughout supporting Xian Island, causing a group of Qi condensation stage disciples who had no chance to watch the competition to be filled with regret. They often pestered the seniors who had watched the competition to talk about it. As for the so-called seniors of the various lineages, they were filled with admiration for Yu Qianqiu. When they spoke, they couldn't help but add oil and vinegar. As a result, a climax of learning from Yu Qianqiu was set off in supporting Immortal Island. In particular, when it was said that Yu Qianqiu cultivated the Guiyuan sword technique of the Sutra Pavilion, a group of Qi condensation stage disciples were amazed. It turned out that supporting Xian Island had such a powerful sword technique. They immediately set their cultivation goal on the Guiyuan sword technique after they reached the foundation establishment stage. The Sutra Pavilion was also very lively these days. Some foundation establishment stage disciples all went to study the Guiyuan sword technique. As a result, a scene that had not been seen on supporting Xian Island for thousands of years appeared. There were tens of thousands of disciples on supporting Xian Island. Because there was only one sword technique and it could not be taken out, those who came could only memorize it. As a result, countless foundation establishment stage disciples lined up in the Sutra Pavilion. Some people saw that the scene was so lively, and they were afraid that they would not be able to line up. They even brought food to line up overnight. Of course, some people with higher cultivation levels also came. Everyone had seen the competition that day, so they naturally wanted to see what was so special about the Guiyuan sword technique. It actually allowed Yu Qianqiu to kill disciples with higher cultivation levels than him. It was really worth learning from. Chapter 160. A few days later, the results of the competition were out. 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples were confirmed. Yu Qianqiu got what he wanted, so he was naturally one of them. Furong knew that Yu Qianqiu was going to leave tomorrow, so she spent the entire day in Alchemy Pavilion, Yu Qianqiu's exclusive courtyard. The two of them were about to part, so it was inevitable that they would say some sweet nothings. The stone table in the courtyard was filled with food. Naturally, it was brought by a certain someone. Furong sat on the side with an unhappy expression. She pouted and said, "What am I going to do if you leave? If I had known earlier, I would have gone to participate in the competition." Knowing that she didn't want to part with him, Yu Qianzhou smiled but didn't say anything. He thought, if you want to participate in the competition, your old man won't agree even if you beat him to death. In this shitty sect, killing people doesn't even happen in the blink of an eye. It's as normal as eating a damn meal. AI. This girl. After her face was healed, she was clearly more cheerful than before. She also talked more. Unfortunately, her personality was still a bit introverted. But that was also good. She was so beautiful. If she was too extroverted, she would definitely make him wear a green hat. She was a beauty. It was like this. If you didn't provoke others, there would be others who would provoke you. Qianzhou, you're the most resourceful. Think of a way to bring me out as well. Furong's smile was like a flower. She got up and picked up the wine pot, pouring wine for Yu Qianzhou and flattering him. Yu Qianzhou was pestered by her for a long time. It really was a bit of a headache. His eyes turned and he suddenly stared at Furong's chest. What's wrong? Furong saw that his gaze was strange. She also looked at her chest, but didn't find anything abnormal. It could be seen that Furong was already used to his actions. Yu Qianzhou shook his head solemnly and said, "That's not right. It seems to be a lot bigger than last time. What's going on?" "Really?" Furong suspiciously looked at her chest. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Yu Qianzhou's snickering. She immediately understood that he was teasing her again. Blushing, she threw the wine cup in her hand at him. Yu Qianzhou dodged to the side and grabbed her wrist, pulling her into his arms. He chuckled and said, "Look at you, a girl. How can you touch a man in broad daylight? Aren't you afraid of being seen by others?" Furong herself didn't know what was going on, but every time she was pulled into his embrace, she would feel as if her whole body had lost all its strength. He struggled weakly and said, "Who told you to always bully me?" "Nonsense, why would I bully you? If I say it's big, then it's big. You don't believe me. I'll bring you in for a checkup right now." Yu Qianzhou abruptly picked her up and walked into the room, causing Hibiscus to cry out in alarm again. Quack! Scream! Scream! I'm the only one living here. Even if you shout yourself hoarse, no one will know. Not long after, the sound of two people fighting came from the room again. The two of them were lying on the bed with their clothes disheveled. Yu Qianzhou's fingers had already felt a moist spot. He wanted to explore it again, but the beauty beside him said no. Immediately, his fingers were clamped by the elastic thighs. Yu Qianzhou groaned in infinite sorrow. He pulled out his sinful hand and cursed in his heart, "Damn it. These days where I can see and touch but not eat are too torturous. Lousy, sex is emptiness, emptiness is sex. Ba. I'll endure. Endure. Endure." The two of them lazily hugged each other. Furong suddenly asked, "When will you come back?" Yu Qianzhou answered half dead, "I don't know. I probably won't be back for a while." The two of them sank into silence again. The soft hand on Yu Qianzhou's chest suddenly rose up. She grabbed his trembling hand and pressed it on her plump breasts. Yu Qianzhou was startled. He turned his head and smiled bitterly. "I say, little sister. Big brother, I have already endured very hard. Don't seduce me anymore." Furong let out an almost inaudible sound. She whimpered, "I'll give it to you." "What did you say?" Yu Qianzhou sat up. His eyes swept back and forth across that alluring body. He said very seriously, "I'm very pure. It's very easy for me to believe other people's words. You must not speak carelessly. The god is watching. Repeat what you said just now. I didn't hear it clearly. Forong's face flushed red. She didn't dare to repeat it. She turned her graceful body to the side and didn't say another word. Yu Qianqiu laughed mischievously. He leaned over to her ear and asked, "You're not afraid anymore?" Forong softly replied, "N.G.G.A." Yu Qianqiu looked up to the sky and laughed wildly, "Cake seller. Long live Chairman Mao." Then he pounced on her as if he was starving. The spring night was bitter and short. The sun rose high in the sky. The hibiscus bloomed to express the feelings of spring. It was a splendid night. Only the two people in the room knew about it. Yu Qianqiu looked down at Forong's smooth and tender body. In his previous life, he walked among flowers. He had plucked countless flowers. He was very experienced. But in this life, he was still a virgin. He didn't expect Forong to take advantage of this era's essence. It wasn't easy. While she was sleeping soundly, Yu Qianqiu quietly got up and put on his clothes. Just as he turned around, he saw a pair of extremely bashful big eyes looking at him. He couldn't help but smile awkwardly. "You're awake." He hated the sadness of parting. He wanted to sneak away. "Are you leaving? I'll send you." Forong picked up a piece of clothing to cover her chest. Suddenly, she frowned. Biting her lips, she stubbornly got off the bed and put on her clothes. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the bed that was dotted with red spots. Then he looked at Forong's strange walking posture. He thought to himself, "Oh no, it was Forong's first night yesterday. I was a little too indulgent." He couldn't help but smile bitterly. "How are you going to send me off like this? Aren't you afraid that others will see through you?" "No, I." After walking a few steps, she also realized that something was wrong. She couldn't say the rest of her words. Yu Qianqiu walked downstairs to stop her. He gently whispered in her ear, "Be obedient. There's no need to send me off. I just want to tell you that I will always think of you. You just wait for me in Wanfen Garden. You have to work hard to cultivate. Do you understand?" "Yes." Forong nodded, feeling wronged. Yu Qianqiu gently pushed her away. He opened the door and flew straight to Penglai Pavilion on his sword. He faintly heard the sound of crying. In front of Penglai Pavilion, 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples led by Elder Quan of the Cultivation Pavilion were ready to leave. There were many onlookers. Yu Qianqiu saw his master Guan Weiwu waving at him from the crowd. He couldn't help but feel touched. This muddle-headed master actually remembered that he was leaving today. It was really rare. Thus, he happily ran over and bowed, saying, "Disciple will be leaving now. Master, please take care." I know. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and suddenly said with a voice transmission, "The leader, Quan Deming, is my junior brother. I have already told him that if you have any trouble, you can look for him. He will help you." Yu Qianqiu thanked him and returned to the group. Suddenly, he heard another voice transmission, "Humph. Forong didn't return last night. Did she spend the night at your place?" "Damn." It was father-in-law Fei's voice. Yu Qianqiu looked around and found Ferdinand, who was glaring at him in the crowd. He was stunned. He had already slept with his daughter. What else could he say? Yu Qianqiu bowed respectfully. After talking with the sect leader, Quan Deming and Elder Quan returned to the front of the group. He glanced at everyone and shouted in a deep voice, "Let's go." With that, he took the lead and flew away on his sword. Swoosh swoosh. 15 flying swords shot out and 15 figures quickly followed. Below, countless people showed envious eyes. The wind whistled in Yuchincho's ears. He slightly slowed down and looked back in the direction of the alchemy pavilion. He didn't know if that woman was still crying in his room. He felt guilty and exhaled. He suddenly turned back and his sword turned into a stream of light. He quickly chased after the group in front of him. Chapter 161. No one knew when the original Cultivation Alliance was from. To put it bluntly, it was just something with an undeserved reputation. This time, it was different. Kwang-sung caused a series of troubles. In the end, everyone had to clean up after him. Even Fuxian Island was not at ease. In view of this, the major sects finally made up their minds to enrich the Cultivation Alliance and make it work. They could not always make everyone suffer because of one sect. There must be justice for everything. This was the purpose of the Cultivation Alliance. Of course, the so-called Cultivation Alliance was something created by the righteous sections. It had nothing to do with the demonic sections. There were probably hundreds of righteous sects in the entire Huaxia Empire. There were major sects like Fuxian Island that had tens of thousands of disciples. There were also small sects that only had one disciple. These small sects even had only one disciple. After discussion, the Cultivation Alliance would be managed by the top 10 sections. The executive director would be changed every year, and the top 10 sects would take turns taking charge. The purpose was naturally to ensure the so-called fairness. The first year was this year, starting from Fuxian Island. As for sects other than the top 10 sects, those who were willing to join the Cultivation Alliance would more or less send someone to be responsible for the liaison work. The top 10 sects would still play the leading role. In fact, there were many small sects that were unwilling to join. For them, the disadvantages were greater than the advantages. Not to mention the constraints, the small sects would not dare to cause trouble and ask the Cultivation Alliance to uphold justice. Who would be like Kwang-sung and run to provoke the demonic sect's evil blood devil palace? Wouldn't that be courting death? But they had to join. The top 10 sects issued a declaration. Any decent sects that did not join the Cultivation Alliance would have to pray for their own good if they encountered any trouble in the future. This meant that if they did not join, they would not be able to do anything alone. It would be very eye-catching and easy to be bullied. There would not even be anyone to help them. However, the top 10 sects did not blindly bully the small sections. For example, the Cultivation Alliance's normal operating expenses were completely shared by the top 10 sections. They would not let the small sects pay a single cent. The only requirement was that anyone who joined must obey the decisions made by the Cultivation Alliance. Otherwise, the consequences would be severe. For the sake of fairness, the Cultivation Alliance was not placed in any of the righteous sections. The 10 major sects jointly invested in a building in the 100 Flowers Valley, a place that was neither righteous nor demonic, to serve as the organization's headquarters. Yu Qianqiu and the others did not know about this at first. When they followed Quan Deming to the 100 Flowers Valley, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Why was the Cultivation Alliance here? Thinking about it, he felt relieved. It was probably only here that no one would have any objections. Otherwise, no one would feel at ease putting it in anyone's home. He didn't know what to do if he bumped into Yan Zixia again. This was something that Yu Qianqiu was a little worried about. After all, he had taken advantage of her, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 meals. He didn't even let go of her curvy body parts. It would be awkward to see him again. As the saying goes, what you fear will happen. As soon as they entered the 100 Flowers Valley, although the palace master of the 100 Flowers Valley didn't come personally, she sent a son, a daughter, and a group of disciples to welcome the guests. Everyone was in the cultivation world. Although supporting Immortal Island only had a dozen or so people, they represented a sect. Therefore, they still had to show the necessary etiquette. As soon as they entered the valley, they saw an extraordinary young man and a beautiful woman standing at the city gate. Both of them cupped their fists and bowed to Quan Deming. Yan Zhuixing, Yan Zixia, I represent my mother to welcome the seniors from supporting Immortal Island. Quan Deming smiled and greeted them politely. He didn't dare to put on airs of the world's #1 sect in front of them. Others might not know, but how could he not know? The so-called mother was his senior sister, the daughter of his master's previous sect master, Guan Dinghai. As soon as Yu Qianqiu entered the city, he noticed Yan Zixia. Fortunately, he had always liked to keep a low profile. When he entered, he stood at the back. When the situation turned bad, he immediately hid behind everyone. He didn't know if the other party saw him or not. The people from supporting Immortal Island and the people who came to welcome them walked in. There were many people watching. They were all individual cultivators, both righteous and demonic. The righteous and demonic path in the 100 Flowers Valley were free to come and go. Everyone was here to watch. After all, supporting Immortal Island was famous. They weren't like other sects who often had people outside. It was rare for supporting Immortal Island to send a group of people. It was inevitable that they wanted to see the glory of the world's #1 sect. The place where the 100 Flowers Palace welcomed supporting Immortal Island was at the 100 Flowers house. It wasn't the first time Yu Qianqiu had been here. When they arrived at the entrance of the 100 Flowers house, the people from the other sects of the Cultivation Alliance had already arrived. There were hundreds of people waiting there. The leaders of the sects all came to say a few words to Quan Deming. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the crowd. There were quite a few familiar faces. He seemed to have seen the leader of the Moon Clan when he was in the Demon region. The few female disciples behind him were also very familiar. The leader of Ong Kwangsung was actually Lu Wanwan, an old acquaintance. The person behind him was even more familiar. It was Lu Jingguang, whom he had once stripped naked. Damn! This was going to be interesting. What day was it today? What a sin! Yu Qianqiu groaned in pain. His body shrank in the crowd. There was a saying that went, "You can hide now, but you can't hide forever." He was so big, and supporting Immortal Island was so eye-catching. Where could he hide? There was another saying that went even better, "Women are more careful than men." This was even more true. A female disciple of the Moon Clan glanced over and was stunned. Then, she whispered something in the elder's ear. The elder of the Moon Clan's eyes lit up. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding behind the crowd, sneakily. The elder of the Moon Clan, Hua Rui, suddenly chuckled and said, "Elder Quan, I heard that your outstanding disciple, Yu Qianqiu, is also here." "Who is it? Can I have a look?" "Yu Qianqiu is here. Elder Quan, we have to ask him to come and see." The Daluo sect was also in an uproar. In the eyes of the other sects, they were a little surprised to see such a scene. Who was this Yu Qianqiu? He was so famous that even the first and second sects of the Orthodox sects were so eager to see him. Of course, they didn't know that the trial in the Demon region was a secret between the top 3 sects of the Orthodox and Devil sections. Ong Kwangsung's Lu Wanwan and Lu Jingguang exchanged a look. They were both confused. The name Yu Qianqiu was so familiar. Yan Zixia, who was standing at the entrance of the 100 Flowers house, looked around the crowd of Fuxian Island and finally saw the familiar figure hiding behind the crowd. Yu Qianqiu, come out and greet the seniors of the various sections. Quan Deming smiled and turned around. Bitch! I'll sell you to Africa. Would it kill you to speak less? Yu Qianqiu hated him to death. There were too many people. To prevent him from squeezing out, the disciples of Fuxian Island automatically made way for him, revealing his true appearance. He had no choice. He would be killed no matter what he did. Yu Qianqiu smiled awkwardly at the crowd and walked over. Lu Wanqian and Lu Jingguang were shocked at the same time. There were many people with the same name and surname in this world, but if they had the same name and surname and also had the same appearance, then they could only be the same person. Moreover, Yu Qianzhou's name was rarely seen. The other On Guangcang disciples also looked at Yu Qianzhou in shock. Lu Jingguang, who was still in shock, wanted to step out and question them. However, he was stopped by Lu Wanwan the moment he took a step out. Lu Wanwan shook his head gently and winked at the people of supporting Immortal Island, hinting him not to be rash. Lu Jingguang looked at the people of the world's #1 sect and held back the impulse in his heart. He had no choice but to hold back. He heard that the people of Fuxian Island were all extraordinary. The elder in charge was at the tribulation stage and there were 5 late-stage nascent soul cultivators. On his side, the elder in charge was only at the mid-stage nascent soul realm. Although there were 5 nascent soul realm elders, they couldn't defeat them. This was the difference between the world's #1 and #5. The difference was huge. Chapter 162. Yu Qianzhou was most concerned about On Guangcang's group. Their actions were all seen by him. It seemed that Fuxian Island's name was really famous. Just their signboard alone was enough to intimidate people. The corner of his mouth curled up into a smile. He already had an idea in his mind, so he immediately felt relaxed. Fuxian Island's core formation stage disciple, Yu Qianzhou, greets seniors. Yu Qianzhou smiled and cupped his hands at the people around him. Hua Rui giggled and said, "You are Yu Qianzhou. The last time I saw you, you were only at the foundation establishment stage, right? How long has it been? You have already broken through to the core formation stage. You are indeed an outstanding disciple of Fuxian Island." The Luo sect's principal elder was called Zhu Xianxian. Although he didn't go to the demon ghost region, he had heard of Yu Qianzhou. He immediately walked over with a smile and grabbed Yu Qianzhou's arm. He patted it and said, "You are indeed extraordinary, extraordinary." Ha! Senior, you flatter me. Yu Qianzhou took this opportunity to quietly withdraw his hand. He did not have a good impression of the Deluo sect, and sooner or later, he would come looking for them to settle the score. As a man, there was no justice in not taking revenge. Everyone saw that the 3 sects were speaking in riddles. They didn't know what was so good about Yu Qianzhou. While they were wondering, Yu Qianzhou walked toward On Guangcang with a smile. Lu Wanqian, Lu Jingguang, long time no see. How have you been? Yu Qianzhou stood in front of the 2. His smile gradually turned into a sneer. The originally lively surroundings suddenly became silent. Anyone could see that Yu Qianzhou and On Guangcang had a grudge. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called him by his name in public. Yan Zixia frowned. She had carefully investigated Yu Qianzhou's background and naturally knew that Yu Qianzhou used to be On Guangcang's disciple. Now that he had joined another sect, it was taboo in the cultivation world. Why did he provoke him instead of hiding from On Guangcang? Quan Deming was astonished as well. How did Yu Qianzhou get involved with the Blue Light School? He hoped that nothing bad would happen to him. Before this brat even arrived, many people had already greeted him and asked him to watch out for him. Guan Weiwu, Ferdinand, O Sihai, Feng Xiangtian, Guan Dinghai, and the old consecrator Ma Jiugu. Each of them had a higher rank than the other. Lu Wanqian's expression changed. He also didn't know what Yu Qianzhou was up to, but he definitely didn't want to have any conflict with supporting Immortal Island. If it wasn't for supporting Immortal Island, On Guangcang would have already been eliminated by the Blood Demon Palace. He put on a smile and said, "This little brother from supporting Immortal Island is called Yu Qianzhou, right? I don't think we know you." Hearing his words, Yan Zixia was stunned. Her brother Yan Juixing's eyes flickered as he glanced at the crowd. No one knew what he was thinking. Yo! Elder Lu, you are really forgetful. I almost died in your hands back then. Have you forgotten so quickly? No, I'm afraid you think I'm already dead. Yu Qianqiu's tone was strange and aggressive. Humph. I've never seen you before. Lu Wanqian ignored him and cupped his hands at Quan Deming. Elder Quan, what is the meaning of this? Are you trying to bully us? Looking at Lu Wanqian's secretive behavior, the people around them didn't say anything and just watched the show. However, Ong Guangsong was embarrassed. No matter what, it was a big sect in the cultivation world. Yet, it was being pressured by a little disciple from supporting Immortal Island. Lu Xingguang glared at him and trembled with anger. With his status in Ong Guangsong, he had never been humiliated like this in public. Quan Deming stroked his beard and pondered. Yu Qianqiu said that he almost died in his hands back then. It seemed like they were enemies of life and death. This matter was a little troublesome. Yu Qianqiu wasn't an ordinary disciple. After thinking about it, he shouted, Yu Qianqiu, don't mess around. Yu Qianqiu choked with anger. He paused and bowed to Quan Deming. Yes, elder. When he turned around and saw Lu Xingguang, he couldn't help but mock him. You look like you want to bite me. Clean face and no beard. Who doesn't know that you were castrated by the demonic path? The whole Ong Guangsong almost brought the destruction of the sect because of you. Why are you here pretending to be a pretty boy? Humph. The crowd was in an uproar. Not many people knew that Lu Xingguang was castrated. When Yu Qianqiu revealed it, it was a little shocking. Everyone knew his status in Ong Guangsong. If that was the case, there was a reason why Ong Guangsong went against the demonic path. The world's #1 sect was indeed the #1 sect. They even knew such a secret. Those sects who had participated in the demon-slaying conference organized by Ong Guangsong immediately understood everything. Ong Guangsong used the name of demon-slaying conference to take advantage of everyone for revenge. Those sects had more or less suffered great losses. Some sects were even directly destroyed by the demonic path. In an instant, countless hateful eyes stared at Ong Guangsong and the others. Stop right there. Lu Xingguang was about to go crazy. With such a secret exposed, even a man wouldn't be able to withstand it. He immediately rushed out and was about to fight Yu Qianqiu. The two of them were very close to each other. Before anyone could react, Lu Xingguang and Yu Qianqiu had already engaged in close combat. The former punched the latter's head. Yu Qianqiu turned around and grabbed his arm with a backhand. With the other hand, he punched his face twice quickly. Then, he grabbed the back of his neck and raised his knee to hit him twice. Finally, he pushed his hand away and raised his leg high, sending Lu Xingguang flying. Fortunately, there were many people behind him. Ong Guangsong's disciples had already caught him. However, his whole face had already become a bloody mess and he was unconscious. In fact, Yu Qianqiu had seen through Lu Xingguang's cultivation at a glance. He was only at the late stage of foundation establishment. Therefore, he deliberately provoked him. He wanted him to make the first move and then find an excuse to beat him up. Who knew that this silly bird would be so angry that he actually wanted to have a one-on-one fight with him? Wasn't this courting death? One had to know that Yu Qianqiu had mingled in the underworld in his previous life. His position as the boss was obtained through punches and kicks. There was no need to mention his one-on-one experience. It wasn't a problem for him to fight several people at once. How could this Ong Guangsong's eldest young master be his opponent? In the end, in just a few moves, while everyone was still in a daze, Lu Xingguang had already been sent flying by a kick. People in the cultivation world were used to fighting with cultivation and spells. How many people would fight like this? Yu Qianzhou's movements were as smooth as flowing water. He was too skilled. He was simply too handsome. Everyone was dumbfounded. This Yu Qianzhou was worthy of being an outstanding disciple of supporting Immortal Island. He could even fight hand to hand. He was indeed not bad. The disciples of supporting Immortal Island were even more impressed. This Yu Qianzhou shocked everyone with just one move. He really made supporting Immortal Island proud. Actually, as a man, it was not bad to show off his masculine charm occasionally, especially when it came to fists and kicks. It was very lethal to women. For example, Yan Zixia and the female disciples of the Moon Clan were all amazed. "Little bastard, you actually dared to hit me. Do you want to die?" There were many unreasonable things in the world. It was not the first time that the villain first complained. For example, between the one who hit and the one who was hit, Yu Qianzhou shouted coldly and wanted to rush over to beat him up again. An Kuang-tsung and the others weren't useless. The grandson of the sect leader was beaten up because he didn't react in time. Now that he was beaten up again, he wouldn't be able to show his face in public anymore. Immediately, a few people drew their swords and pointed them at Yu Qianzhou. Hey! This time, supporting Immortal Island didn't want to be outdone. A few people flashed over and stood in front of Yu Qianzhou, pointing their swords at him. Chapter 163. How dare they make a move on the disciples of supporting Xian Island? The 5 nascent soul late-stage disciples looked at each other coldly with disdain. This was what the world's #1 sect was proud of. It immediately put a lot of pressure on An Kuang-tsung and the others. Once they made a move, they didn't even need to think about the consequences. Although the disciples of supporting Xian Island had a cruel competition on the island, they were able to stand out and come here. Naturally, they understood the mission they had to shoulder. How could they tarnish the reputation of supporting Xian Island when they were united against outsiders? Lu Wanqian held the unconscious Lu Jingguang, whose face was covered with blood, and said angrily, "Elder Quan, don't go too far with your supporting Xian Island." Quan Deming also felt that it was a little unreasonable to continue making trouble. On the first day of the Cultivation Alliance's operation, such a thing happened. If this matter was blown up, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he returned. He immediately shouted in a deep voice, "All of you, come back. Elder Quan, he was the one who hit me first. We can't let him go so easily." Yu Qianzhou pointed at the unconscious Lu Jingguang and said. It seemed like he wouldn't let him go unless he killed him. "You shut up." Quan Deming was really having a headache. No matter where this kid went, he seemed to be doing some soul-stirring things, but he couldn't do anything to him. Seeing that Quan Deming was angry, Yu Qianzhou and the 5 nascent soul stage disciples returned behind him. Quan Deming cupped his hands at Lu Wanqian and said, "Elder Lu, it's our supporting Xian Island's lack of discipline. I hope you can give me face and let this matter go. Don't take it to heart." Lu Wanqian's face was gloomy. He snorted coldly and didn't say anything. It was really hard for him to say anything. Although it was the other party's disciple who started it, it was his own disciple who made the first move. However, no matter what, his strength was still inferior to the other party. Otherwise, how could he let it go? The cultivation world had always been one where the strong would not yield to the weak. Also, Quan Deming had personally apologized. They had to give him face. Yan Zhuixing, who was at the entrance of 100 Flowers' house, saw that the situation had calmed down. He waved his hand and a few people went over to An Kuang-tsung's side to carry the unconscious Lu Jingguang for treatment. At the same time, An Kuang-tsung sent 2 disciples to follow. If someone were to question why the members of the Flower Palace didn't come out and reconcile when the matter had just occurred, then why would they not? That would truly be wronging them. As long as they didn't defend them, the Flower Palace would never participate in the disputes of any sect. This was the foundation of the Flower Palace's foothold in the cultivation world. After this incident, Yu Qianqiu became famous in the cultivation world. From today onwards, the news of supporting Immortal Island's disciple Yu Qianqiu beating up on Guangceng's sect master's grandson spread throughout the cultivation world. Yan Zhuixing acted as if he had never seen what had just happened. He smiled and cupped his hands at everyone. The Flower Palace has prepared wine in the backyard of 100 Flowers House to welcome our esteemed guests who have come from afar. Please. The sects thanked him. Under the guidance of the Flower Palace's disciples, they passed through the hall and arrived at the backyard of 100 Flowers House. A banquet had already been prepared. The fine wine was accompanied by the fragrance of flowers. It was indeed worthy of the Flower Palace's name. The principal elders of the 10 major sects were arranged to sit at a table. 9 of them were smiling. Only Lu Wanwan didn't look good. Anyone who encountered such an incident would be in a bad mood. The disciples of the other sects found their seats and sat down. Yu Qianqiu and the other 9 core formation stage disciples of his sect sat at a table. Yan Zhuixing, who was greeting the guests, glanced over and was slightly stunned. He turned around thoughtfully and continued to greet the guests. A small detail caught his attention. When Yu Qianqiu and the others sat at a table, the other 9 people seemed to be waiting for Yu Qianqiu. After Yu Qianqiu sat down, the other 9 people sat down as well. It wasn't easy to tell that they weren't paying attention. Although the Palace Lord of the Flower Palace didn't come personally, she didn't slack in her etiquette. The 2 siblings personally toasted each table. When it came to Yu Qianqiu's table, Yu Qianqiu quickly glanced at Yan Zixia and saw that she was completely unperturbed, so he simply acted as if nothing had happened. The fact that Yan Zixia was cultivating on supporting Immortal Island was something that very few people in the entire island knew about. Aside from Yu Qianqiu, even Quan Deming didn't know about it. Naturally, no one else knew about it. During the meal, the host warmly welcomed them and exchanged toasts. The atmosphere was good. Although many people had reached the stage of fasting and didn't need to eat anything, relying on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to maintain their vitality, as long as they were human, they couldn't avoid following the ancient rules. After all, they weren't immortals. After the banquet, everyone came to a rather remote place in the 100 Flower Valley after eating and drinking to their heart's content. There was a large house that stood there. On the main door, there was a jade plaque with the words, Cultivation Alliance, carved on it. The inside had obviously been renovated. There were many small courtyards. After the sects had allocated their residences, their respective elders gathered together and went to the Flower Palace to greet the Palace Lord to thank her for her hospitality. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have to do this. The 10 major sects were already giving them face by eating. But what kind of background did the Flower Palace have? Everyone knew that this was a place that both the orthodox and demonic sects had to give face to. Moreover, they were going to be in someone else's territory in the future. How could they not greet the Palace Lord? However, if it wasn't for Yu Qianqiu and the other disciples, what was the point? It wasn't like they were going to steal someone else's territory. They didn't have the qualifications to meet the Palace Lord. After Quan Deming left, a nascent soul disciple named Shui Siping took care of the group from supporting Immortal Island. Yu Qianqiu wandered around the garden twice and was really bored. He found Shui Siping and asked for leave. He wanted to go to the 100 Flowers Valley for a walk, but Shui Siping said, no. The core formation disciples were afraid of him, but Shui Siping, who was in the late nascent soul stage, didn't care about him. Yu Qianqiu couldn't do anything even if he ran into a wall, so he could only accompany everyone in the garden and count their hairs. After waiting for half a day, Quan Deming finally returned. Yu Qianqiu was happy that he could finally ask for leave and go for a walk. Unexpectedly, he threw out a large pile of jade tablets and asked everyone to inject a wisp of true origin into it. Yu Qianzhou was dumbfounded. There were hundreds of jade archives, and he needed to inject a wisp of true origin into each one. That was quite a lot. At his level of cultivation, it wasn't easy to refine spiritual qi into a wisp of true origin that he could skillfully control. Everyone's expressions changed. How much spiritual qi did he need to absorb to recover after using up so much true origin? The higher one's cultivation, the more spiritual qi he needed to recover. This wasn't something that was used up in a fight. Taking a few qi replenishing pills would just take some time to recover. Instead, it was something that was completely cut off from the dantian. It was like a withered seedling of rice that could grow with a little water, but if you uprooted the seedling, it would be useless no matter how much water you fed it. Yu Qianzhou was considered lucky. He had enough spirit stones to support him, but it was really difficult to refine true origin to the point where he could skillfully control it. Otherwise, with so many top-grade spirit stones, his cultivation would have been blown to the end of the tribulation passing stage long ago. Why would he still be in the core formation stage? The group of people formed a circle. With Quan Deming in the lead, they passed the tablets one by one and took turns inputting them. After a round, the tablets returned to his hands. The sky had already darkened. He took the tablets and went out again, instructing everyone not to go out. Actually, there was no need for him to instruct them. Everyone's spirits were already low. A few to the east and a few to the west sat cross-legged in the garden. Each of them took out a vitality pill and prepared to replenish their spiritual qi. Suddenly, everyone felt the garden brighten. They looked towards the source of the light. They saw a faint layer of white light enveloping Yu Qianzhou's hand. In his palm was a handful of vitality pills. There were probably more than 10 of them. Just from the appearance of the pills, it was obvious that they were much better than the pills everyone else was using. Everyone sighed inwardly. As expected of the Alchemy Pavilion's principal elder's direct disciple. Even the pills he took were rarely seen by ordinary disciples. It was no wonder his cultivation improved so quickly. While everyone was feeling envious, they suddenly saw Yu Qianzhou staring at the pills in his palm. He sighed and muttered, "Damn it. I hate eating this thing the most. I don't even know how much I've eaten these past few years." AI. As he said that, he frowned and swallowed a few mouthfuls of pills. Then, he took out another handful and swallowed it. He hadn't eaten this thing for a long time. Hard things were really uncomfortable when they went into his stomach. Top-grade spirit stones were what he liked the most. Not only were they full of spiritual qi, they were also very convenient. However, he couldn't take them out and use them in front of everyone. Wouldn't that be too frightening? The group of disciples looked at the pills in their hands again. Their faces twitched non-stop. They all had the urge to throw them away. Chapter 164. When Quan Deming returned, there were only 15 jade archives left in his hands. After giving one to each of them, he told the disciples, "From today onwards, the main gate of the Cultivation Alliance will be guarded by disciples below the nascent soul stage. 2 people will guard the main gate every day." The jade archives in everyone's hands were the entry jade archives. After all, there were hundreds of disciples from each sect here. If an unfamiliar person entered, they could ask the other party to show them their jade archives. If the jade archives in the other party's hands contained their primordial qi, they would naturally be allowed to enter. Otherwise, they could refuse entry. After some arrangements, Yu Qianzhou's cultivation was below the nascent soul stage, so he naturally couldn't escape the misfortune of guarding the main gate. He and a core-bearing disciple named Xiong Hui were in the same group. In other words, once it was their turn, the 2 of them would guard the main gate together. Yu Qianzhou never expected that one day he would be reduced to the point of guarding the main gate. However, after thinking about it, it wasn't a big deal. With so many people from each sect taking turns, it wouldn't happen more than 3 times a year. He could just muddle through it. After everyone was given an entry token, Quan Deming finally lifted the ban on everyone. However, he had a request that they couldn't cause trouble for no reason. They could only stay in the 100 Flowers Valley and couldn't leave the valley without permission. Violators would be severely punished. Yu Qianqiu had long wanted to go out for a stroll. It was too boring to stay here. After everyone dispersed, he walked straight out of the garden on Fuxian Island. When he was about to step out of the main gate of the Cultivation Alliance, he suddenly heard someone shouting, "Yu Qianqiu," from behind. He turned around and saw that it was none other than Xiong Hui, who was in the same group as him. Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked curiously, "Senior Xiong, are you looking for me?" Xiong Hui laughed and said, "From now on, we'll be in the same group." He pointed at the 2 disciples who had already appeared at the main gate. "Oh." Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said, "Please take care of me in the future, Senior Xiong." Xiong Hui eagerly followed him because he wanted to befriend him. He didn't dare to put on airs. Moreover, it was uncertain who would be taking care of who. He immediately waved his hand and said, "Junior brother you are too polite. We should take care of each other. By the way, it's already so late, I wonder where junior brother is going." Yu Qianqiu couldn't figure out what this guy was up to. He laughed it off and said, "I'm bored. I heard that the night market in the 100 Flowers Valley is pretty good, so I want to go and have a look. What about you, senior brother?" "Ha, that's exactly what I was thinking. Since that's the case, why don't we go for a stroll and invite junior brother for a drink or two?" Xiong Hui said with a smile. "Looks like he wants to make friends with me." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "How can I let senior brother spend money? Junior brother should be the one treating." Xiong Hui smiled and said, "It's all the same, it's all the same. Junior brother, don't be so polite with me today. It won't be too late to invite me next time." After saying that, he straightforwardly pulled Yu Qianqiu out, and the latter could only helplessly follow. When the 2 of them reached the door, the 2 disciples guarding the door suddenly bowed together and said, "Senior Yu." Both Yu Qianqiu and Xiong Hui were stunned. They stopped to size up the 2 of them and saw that they were only in the middle stage of foundation establishment. Yu Qianqiu asked curiously, "Which sect are you from? How do you know me?" The one on the left said respectfully, "We're disciples from the Jiuhua sect. Today, we met Senior at the 100 Flowers Valley." "Oh, I see." Yu Qianqiu scratched his head. He couldn't figure out what kind of sect this Jiuhua sect was, but it was definitely not one of the top 10 sections. Otherwise, he would definitely have heard of it. Therefore, he reached into his storage bag and took out 2 essence chi pills and said, "This is our first meeting, and I didn't bring anything. Take these 2 essence chi pills as a greeting gift for the 2 of you." As he said that, he threw one over. After the 2 disciples guarding the door caught it, they were immediately stunned. The 2 of them came from a small, unranked sect, so they had never seen an essence chi pill of such quality. It was cold to the touch and had a hazy white pill halo. Normally, an ordinary essence chi pill cost 50 low-grade spirit stones, which was enough to cover the spirit stones that the sect gave them every month. Therefore, essence chi pills were not something that disciples from small sects like them could afford. For a pill of this quality, the price would probably double. When the 2 of them came back to their senses, they realized that Yu Qianqiu and the other person had already walked far away. They couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh. The number 1 sect in the world was indeed not something that ordinary sects could compare to. In fact, it was the first time that Xiong Hui had seen this kind of essence chi pill with a pill halo, let alone them. He was also deeply moved. Who said that auxiliary sects were not as good as the cultivation pavilion? If he had known earlier, he would have joined the alchemy pavilion back then. The two of them chatted as they strolled to the night market in the Hundred Flowers Valley. They saw that everywhere was filled with sparkling fluorescent stones. Under the dim light of the night, the entire night market was particularly enchanting. Looking around, the people wandering around, whether they were from the righteous path or the demonic path, were all leisurely and contented. There was no shouting and killing scene like in the outside world. Xionghui couldn't help but sigh and say, it would be great if the entire cultivation world could live in peace like this. Yu Qianqiu glanced at him and faintly smiled. Live in peace. Whether it was the secular world or the cultivation world, people were selfish. If everyone was selfish, then there would definitely be disputes. Unless everyone held the lofty ideal of starving to death and raising their birds to the sky, the waves would still be there. However, when he saw the night market in the Hundred Flowers Valley, Yu Qianqiu felt a lot more emotional. He thought back to when he kidnapped Guan Yu and brought him here for the sake of his foundation establishment. Then, he took in Chen Feng here, and finally, he and Chu Ping fell in love at the Hundred Flowers Valley. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. In this situation, how can we not drink a few cups to liven things up? Junior brother Yu, where do you think we should go to drink a few cups? Xionghui's words pulled Yu Qianqiu back from his thoughts. He casually said, I didn't expect senior brother to be so easygoing. Let's go to the Hundred Flowers Valley. With that said, he walked in the direction of the Hundred Flowers Valley. Hundred Flowers Valley. Xionghui was stunned. He reached for the storage bag on his waist and thought to himself, I heard that the food and wine of the Hundred Flowers Valley are extremely expensive. Presumably, these spirit stones should be enough. Alright, it's rare to come here, so I'll pretend to be rich today. He hurried a few steps and followed Yu Qianqiu into the Hundred Flowers Valley. The two of them found a seat by the window and sat down. They could also enjoy the beautiful scenery of the night market. When the waiter of the Hundred Flowers Valley saw that the guests had arrived, he eagerly ran over to ask what the two of them wanted. Xionghui smiled generously and said, Junior brother, just order whatever you want to eat. Yu Qianqiu nodded. He didn't stand on ceremony and said without thinking, there's no need to order. Just eat whatever you want. Waiter, give me 2 pots of good Hundred Flowers Valley wine and 5 servings of good meat and vegetable dishes. That's all for now. If it's not enough, we'll talk about it later. With that said, he looked out of the window in a daze. Please wait a moment. Seeing that they were rich customers, the waiter quickly left with a smile. Xionghui, on the other hand, felt a little weak from Yu Qianqiu's good 2 times in a row. He couldn't help but reach for his storage bag again. Not long after, the waiter came back and forth twice and brought their food and wine. He respectfully invited the two of them to enjoy. The two of them picked up their chopsticks and tasted the food a few times. Xionghui looked at the table filled with 10 delicately cooked meat and vegetable dishes. He thought that the Hundred Flowers Valley really lived up to its name. But for some reason, although the food tasted good, the more he ate, the more uncomfortable he felt. He felt like he was sweating. Yu Qianqiu was a person who never got tired of eating. As long as he could afford it, he would never mistreat himself when it came to food. He never thought about the price. It was fine as long as it was worth it. Of course, this was related to his wealth. However, he didn't know that Xionghui's hand under the table was about to tear his storage bag. Did you guys hear? Ong Guangsung's grandson was beaten up today. Hearing people talking about Ong Guangsung, Yu Qianqiu turned his head and glanced at the 4 people who had just sat down at a table. Seeing that they were dressed quite well, they must be rich. Otherwise, they wouldn't dare to come to the Hundred Flowers Valley. He turned his head and listened while eating. Hee. This matter has already spread throughout the Hundred Flowers Valley today. How could I not know? I heard that it was a disciple called Yu Qianqiu from supporting Immortal Island who beat him up. The #1 sect in the world is indeed not a boast. Just this disciple alone shocked Ong Kuang-tsung and the others. They didn't even dare to fight back. Hi! That goes without saying. Ong Kuang-tsung provoked the Blood Demon Palace and almost brought about the destruction of his sect. If it wasn't for supporting Immortal Island, Ong Kuang-tsung would have long been erased from the cultivation world. Yeah. I heard that too. Supporting Immortal Island is really amazing. Speaking of which, I know this Ong Kuang-tsung's Lu Jingguang. A few years ago, he became Dao companions with a female disciple of his sect for dual cultivation. Seeing that his grandfather is the sect master of Ong Kuang-tsung, my father even brought me to Ong Kuang-tsung to congratulate him on his new year. TSK. Who knew that Lu Jingguang had already been castrated by the devil path? Damn it. How dare a eunuch pretend to do dual cultivation? What a pity for that beautiful female disciple. Chapter 165. Hearing that Lu Jingguang had actually become Dao companions with a beautiful female disciple, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Beautiful female disciple. Could it be Chu Ping Er? As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In Yu Qianqiu's heart, the most beautiful female disciple in the whole of Ong Kuang-tsung was naturally Chu Ping Er. Shoo, lower your voice. The two people sitting over there seemed to be disciples of supporting Xian Island from their attire. The four of them looked towards the window and instantly shut their mouths. Coincidentally, the waiter came over to ask the four of them to order, so they immediately changed the topic. Yu Qianqiu was listening to the crucial part, but they didn't say anything. This matter concerned Chu Ping Er, so how could he bear it? He stood up slowly and walked towards the table of the four of them with a gloomy face. Xiong Hui was in a bad mood. No matter how good the food was, it didn't taste good in his mouth. Suddenly, he saw Yu Qianqiu leave the table with a gloomy face. What was he going to do? He immediately followed. Four of you. May I know which sect you are from? Yu Qianqiu calmed himself down and walked to the table with a smile. The four of them had just finished ordering. At this moment, they saw Yu Qianqiu walking over to ask questions. Looking at his attire and the person behind him, the four of them exchanged glances. As expected, they were disciples of supporting Xian Island. The four of them stood up. The person opposite Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said, I am Bai Zizong. The four of us are good friends. We belong to the four great clans of the cultivation world. We agreed to come to the 100 Flowers Valley to have some fun. May I know what advice does Senior from supporting Xian Island have for us? The four of them couldn't see through Yu Qianqiu and Xiong Hui's cultivation, so they naturally addressed them as seniors. However, Yu Qianqiu was able to see through their cultivation at a glance. Three of them were in the early stage of the core formation realm, and one of them was in the late stage of the foundation building realm. The four great clans of the cultivation world were the four great clans between the righteous and demonic paths. They were quite similar to the 100 Flowers Valley, neither belonging to the righteous path nor the demonic path. It was rumored that the four great clans were of the same breadth and branches, and their strength was also extraordinary. Of course, Yu Qianqiu had heard of them. He squinted his eyes and asked with a smile, Are you from the Bai, Jing, Wu, and Tan families? The four of them cupped their fists and said, That's right. Bai Zizong respectfully asked, May I know who Senior is from Fuxian Island? So it turns out to be a disciple of one of the four major families of the cultivation world. It's an honor to meet you. Yu Qianqiu cupped his fists and said indifferently, I'm not an expert. I'm the villain that you guys were talking about just now, Yu Qianqiu. As soon as he said this, the four of them looked at each other. Indeed, the gods were watching from above. Fortunately, they didn't say anything bad about him behind his back. Otherwise, it would be a mess. One must know that although the four great clans were quite powerful, they paled in comparison to Fuxian Island. Bai Zizong was stunned. He quickly bowed and said, "The four of us talked too much. We didn't know you were here. Please forgive us, senior." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "I don't like to be secretive. What's done is done. There's no need to forgive us. It's just hitting someone. Some people were asking for it. Since I dared to hit them, I'm not afraid of others talking about it. Moreover, the four of you didn't say anything bad about me. What's wrong with that? Wasn't it just hitting someone? What a big tone." The four of them smiled unnaturally. They thought to themselves, only the disciples of Fuxian Island have such a tone. Ong Guangzhong is ranked 6th in the righteous path. There aren't many that they can afford to offend. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to stir up the entire cultivation world. Even one of the four great clans can't match up to them. It's fate that brought us together. I, Yu Qianqiu, love to make friends. Why don't we have a drink together? I wonder if the four of you are willing to do me the honor." Yu Qianqiu smiled. 3 of the 4 looked at Bai Zizong. The latter was a little hesitant. He didn't know what Yu Qianqiu wanted to do. It was necessary to be on guard when traveling in the cultivation world. Yu Qianqiu could tell that Bai Zizong was the leader of the 4. He smiled faintly and said, "Don't the 4 of you want to give me a chance to flatter the 4 great clans?" His words were a little harsh. It was already good enough that the disciples of Fuxian Island didn't do whatever they wanted in the cultivation world. Was there a need to flatter others? At the same time, it was a reminder to the 4 of them. Bai Zizong cupped his hands awkwardly and said, "Then I shall accept your invitation." Yu Qianqiu nodded and shouted, "Boss." The waiter who was serving the dishes hurried over and asked what was the matter. "Prepare a good private room and the best banquet in 100 Flower House. Hurry, I have to entertain these guests." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand. The waiter looked at the dishes and asked, "What about the dishes on this table?" Yu Qianqiu pointed at the table and then the table he was sitting at. "Put it on me. You go do what you need to do. By the way." He changed the topic and stopped the waiter. "This table of food and wine hasn't been touched yet. Go to the night market outside and find 4 cultivators who are currently living in poverty. Tell them that 100 Flowers House made a table of food and wine and invited them to taste it for free. You have to explain to them that after tasting it, they have to evaluate the taste of 100 Flowers House's food and wine. Don't say that it's free, understand?" The waiter was stunned. He scratched his head. He had never seen such a strange customer. Seeing that he didn't respond, Yu Qianqiu said in a low voice, "What? Is my request too much? Don't tell me that you don't know which cultivators are living in poverty after being in 100 Flower House for so long. I understand. You are doing this out of kindness." The waiter smiled apologetically and retreated. He went to the counter and said a few words to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper looked over in surprise and nodded. The waiter ran out like a wisp of smoke. After a short while, the waiter led 4 cultivators in shabby clothes over with expressions of pleasant surprise on their faces. "Everyone, let's stand aside for a while. Don't disturb their appetite." Yu Qianqiu smiled and walked away with them. The manager of the 100 Flowers House walked out of the counter and said with a smile, "So it's Mr. Yu. Did you book the best banquet in the 100 Flowers House?" During the day, he had seen Yu Qianqiu beat someone up in front of everyone, so he naturally recognized him. Yu Qianqiu nodded and didn't say anything. The shopkeeper smiled. "Our best banquet costs 1,000 high-grade spirit stones. It will take some time to prepare. Please wait for a moment, 1,000 high-grade spirit stones for a banquet? Everyone was shocked. Even the 4 clans were no exception. Yu Qianqiu frowned and said coldly, "Shopkeeper, are you reminding me? Are you worried that I can't afford it?" He guessed right. The shopkeeper was afraid that he couldn't afford it and specially came to remind him so that everyone wouldn't feel awkward. There was no need to talk about supporting Immortal Island's wealth. However, Yu Qianqiu was only a core formation realm disciple. How could he take out 1,000 high-grade spirit stones? If he thought about it, he definitely wouldn't say it out loud. He smiled apologetically. No, Mr. You misunderstood. Please follow me to the private room upstairs and wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, he personally led the way. He thought to himself, you're a disciple of supporting Immortal Island, so it's not good for me to offend you. However, if you can't take out the money when it's time to settle the bill, then it's not my problem. Naturally, someone will come looking for your supporting Immortal Island. Chapter 166. The second floor was for the guest rooms, where Yu Qianqiu had stayed before. Nobody knew what the third floor was for. They followed the innkeeper all the way to the top floor, the fourth floor. They pushed open an antique red sandalwood carved wooden door, and a bright and spacious private room appeared in front of them. The innkeeper asked them to wait for a while, then left with a smile. They peeked through the window and looked out. As there were no taller buildings around, the 100 Flowers Valley was right in front of them under the dim light of the night. If it was during the day, it would be a different scene. He then looked at the furnishings around the room. Every single one of them was exquisitely crafted, quiet, and emitted a faint sense of elegance and nobility. The night breeze blew over, bringing with it the faint fragrance of 100 flowers. There was also a bed for Xiao Tian in the inner room, and a small isolated room for convenience and bathing. The so-called private room was a luxurious suite that could allow people to rest in peace. I didn't expect there to be such a good place in the 100 Flowers Valley. Xiong Hui was a little surprised. He was relaxed now, and the bills downstairs were all taken care of by Yu Qianqiu. As for the matter of fighting to treat them, he would not even mention it. As expected of a private room. Bai Zizong looked around and nodded. Suddenly, he shook his head and said, "It's just that we can't afford to let seniors spend so much money. 1,000 top-grade spirit stones is too much. That's nothing. I've been to all the luxurious places in my previous life." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand calmly and said, "Let's not talk about money tonight. This thing is a bastard, it's too disappointing to talk about it." They were speechless. Soon after, the door was pushed open and 6 beautiful women in palace attire entered, carrying wine utensils and dishes in a single file. After going in and out a few times, they filled the bright table inside and respectfully invited them to take a seat. After they were seated, a woman poured wine for each of them. Yu Qianqiu frowned and waved his hand, saying, "You may leave. We have something to discuss, and we don't want anyone to disturb us." "Yes." The ladies bowed and put down the wine jugs in their hands. The woman behind Yu Qianqiu untied a golden bell from the necklace around her neck and gently placed it on the table. She said softly, "If the honored guest has something to summon us, just ring this bell." Yu Qianqiu turned around and saw that there was another bell on her necklace. He nodded and dismissed the women. "Oh my God! What are these things? They actually cost 1,000 top-grade spirit stones." Xiong Hui exclaimed as he poked his chopsticks. "No matter how expensive it is, it's just food, a gimmick to make money." Yu Qianqiu gestured with his hand and said, "Let's eat and talk." They would be letting themselves down if they didn't try such expensive dishes. The few of them ate a few dishes. They tasted each other a few times, but they could not find anything special. As they chatted, they became familiar with each other and started calling each other brothers. Jingzhua, Wu Liqing, and Tan Fei also introduced themselves. When he found out that the four of them were the heirs of the four major clans, Yu Qianqiu was not too surprised. Ordinary people would not go to Hundred Blossoms' house. Yu Qianqiu had something on his mind. After they got to know each other, he put down his wine cup and asked, "Brother Bai, I heard you talking about Onquansung Lu Jingguang's dual cultivation. You said that his Taoist companion is very beautiful. I'm really curious, who is it that actually became a Taoist companion with a eunuch?" Bai Zizeng pointed to Tan Fei and said, "You'll have to ask him. He said it, he's met her." Tan Fei smiled and said, "A few years ago, I followed my father to Onquansung and met her. That woman is a disciple of Onquansung. She's really pretty. As for her name, I can't remember it." Yu Qianqiu's heart sank, but on the surface, he smiled and said, "Brother Tan, you may not know this, but I've always been more interested in stunning beauties. Brother Tan, please think carefully about her name. If there's a chance, I'll go to Onquansung and have a look. Other people are afraid of Onquansung, but I'm not. You even dared to hit the head's grandson, so naturally you wouldn't be afraid." The few of them looked at Yu Qianqiu with a smile that said, "I'll support you." "I see. Let me think about it." Tan Fei held his wine glass and thought for a long time before he said, "Oh, I can't remember her full name, but I think her surname is Su." "Is her surname really Su? Are you sure you remember it correctly?" Yu Qianqiu continued to ask. Now that he thought about it, he remembered that Onquansung had a pretty female disciple with the surname Su. Tan Fei frowned again and thought about it. He nodded and said, "It should be right. At that time, I heard a few female disciples of Onquansung calling her senior sister Su." After getting his confirmation, Yu Qianqiu's heart instantly relaxed. He raised his glass and smiled at everyone. "All right, I'll remember it. Onquansung beauty with the surname Su, if there's a chance, you must go and meet her. Don't let that eunuch take advantage of you. Come, let's have a toast." As soon as he let it go, the atmosphere among everyone changed. They let go of their stomachs and ate to their heart's content. The six of them ate until late at night before they were ready to leave. The golden bell rang and the six women entered. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "Bill, please." The other five were shocked when they heard that. They then remembered that the dishes cost 1,000 superior grade spiritual stones. Even Bai Zizong and the other three from the four families felt the pinch. Not long after, the innkeeper ran in and smiled respectfully, "Mr. Yu, including the 2 tables below, the total is 1,000 orders and 35 upper-grade spirit stones. You are a VIP, so the 2 tables below are free of charge. Please come again in the future. Just pay 1,000 upper-grade spirit stones. The 100 Flowers house is really rich. 35 superior-grade spiritual stones is waived just like that." Yu Qianqiu sneered and took out another storage pouch from his storage pouch. He threw it over and said, "You check if it's 1,000 upper-rank spirit stones and see if I'm missing anything." "Yes, yes, yes." The innkeeper caught the storage bag and nodded. He inserted his divine sense into the bag and was shocked. There were indeed 1,000 superior-grade spiritual stones in it. He smiled apologetically. "Please wait for a moment, Mr. Yu. I'll empty the storage bag for you." Xiong Hui was speechless. He was prepared to dine and dash with Yu Qianqiu. He did not expect him to really take out 1,000 superior-grade spiritual stones. Oh my! This was not just any ordinary kind of money. Bai Zizong and the other 3 did not know the details. They only dared to eat a meal that cost 1,000 superior-grade spiritual stones because they trusted the reputation of the supporting Xian Island. Now that they had paid so much money, the four of them exchanged glances and thought to themselves, the disciples of the supporting Sien Island are indeed extraordinary. They did not even blink when they paid 1,000 superior-grade spiritual stones. Forget it. You can waive 35 superior-grade spiritual stones from me. I don't care about this broken storage bag. Yu Qianqiu said and walked out. If it was any other time, he would ask for it back even if it was a piece of inferior-grade spiritual stone. He would not pretend to be generous when he was stingy. However, he was really happy today. After knowing that Lu Jingguang's cultivation partner was not Chu Ping, he felt relieved. In fact, he was really afraid that the woman he was in love with would betray him. There was another reason. He had made friends with the direct descendants of the four major families in the cultivation world. He had spent a lot of money. How could he be embarrassed over a storage bag? Innkeeper Qin, which esteemed guest booked the best banquet in the 100 Flowers residence? Why don't you introduce him to me? Yu Qianqiu had only taken a few steps when a person's voice suddenly came from outside. Yan Zhuixing walked in with a smile on his face. When the latter saw Yu Qianqiu, he cupped his hands and said happily, I was wondering which esteemed guest it was. It's Brother Yu. Brother Yan. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands. Yan Zhuixing frowned at the innkeeper and said, Innkeeper Qin, how much did you take from Brother Yu? Innkeeper Qin handed over the storage bag in his hand respectfully and said, Innkeeper Qin, how much did you take from Brother Yu? Nonsense. Yan Zhuixing took the storage bag and shouted, Innkeeper Qin, seeing that you didn't know, I won't pursue this matter. But remember, Brother Yu is my friend. In the future, as long as Brother Yu comes to the 100 Flowers residence, all the expenses will be on me. Do you hear me? Innkeeper Qin nodded. Yan Zhuixing snorted and looked at Yu Qianqiu with a smile. Brother Yu, if you treat me as a friend, please take back the spiritual stones. Yu Qianqiu crossed his arms and smiled, not saying a word. He glanced at the shopkeeper and the master, his eyes narrowing. Friends? Ha! It seems like this is the first time we've interacted and spoken. I've interacted with your sister before. This way, we can't be considered as friends, but as relatives. Ha! This brat is interesting. He didn't come earlier or later. He just had to come after I paid. It seems like it's already the middle of the night. He's really punctual. This brat knows how to conduct himself. Interesting. Chapter 167. Brother Yan, you're too kind. How can you eat without paying? Yu Qianqiu extended his hand to stop the spiritual stones. You can't say that. I feel like old friends with Brother Yu and I really want to be friends with you. A banquet is nothing. If Brother Yu thinks highly of me and is willing to be friends with me, then please take back the spiritual stones, Yan Zhuixing said with sincerity. Damn it. Money is a bastard. Money is a bastard. Yu Qianqiu turned around and looked at Bai Zizong and the others. He smiled and said, It's my honor to be friends with Brother Yan. If that's the case, then I'll accept it. He took back the spiritual stones and stuffed them into his storage pouch. Yan Zhuixing nodded with a smile. He looked at Xiong Hui and the others and asked, Brother Yu, who are they? This is my senior brother and these four are my good friends. Yu Qianqiu didn't want to reveal the identity of Bai Zizong and the others, so he just casually said it. The 5 people behind him cupped their hands at Yan Zhuixing and didn't say anything. Yan Zhuixing didn't mind at all and cupped his hands, since you're Brother Yu's friends, then you're my friends too. I'm Yan Zhuixing. Friends, feel free to drop by whenever you're free. I'll pay for all your expenses. After they thanked him again, they knew that it was all thanks to Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu looked out of the window and said regretfully, "It's a pity that it's getting late. We'll have to leave now. We'll come again next time. Please forgive us, Brother Yan." Yan Zhuixing nodded and smiled. "Since you're in a hurry to go back, I won't force you to stay. Please." The group of people went downstairs politely. Yan Zhuixing sent them to the entrance of the 100 Flowers house before they said goodbye. After watching them leave, Yan Zhuixing turned around and looked around the room. Seeing that there were no more guests, the smile on his face disappeared in the blink of an eye. His expression was cold and indifferent. Shopkeeper Chen, who was behind him, said, "I can't believe Yu Qianqiu can really take out 1,000 spiritual stones. Humph. Didn't you see what happened today?" Yan Zhuixing sneered, "A core formation realm disciple can make the Daluo sect and the Moon clan so friendly. He's worth more than 1,000 top-grade spiritual stones. Also, under the watchful eyes of all the major sects, he beat up the grandson of the Qingguang school's leader. Was this something a normal completion-level disciple could do?" "Yu Qianqiu, Yu Qianqiu, Yu Qianqiu, who are you?" Shopkeeper Chen nodded and said, "Now that you mention it, it's really strange. Even for the wealthy supporting Immortal Island, a normal core formation cultivator would not be able to take out 1,000 high-quality spirit stones. Uncle Chen, there's something you need to investigate." Yan Zhuixing turned around, looked outside, and slowly said, "I don't believe that Yu Qianqiu would spend 1,000 high-grade spirit stones for a few ordinary friends. Didn't you say that he just met those 4 people in the lobby downstairs? Find out the background of those 4 people." Bai Zitsong and the other 3 insisted on sending them off. The other 2 couldn't refuse. The 6 of them walked to the entrance of the Cultivation Alliance and were about to go their separate ways. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands. "Okay, I'll stop here. I just settled here and there are a lot of things I don't know yet. I won't invite you in." "Ha! Today was supposed to be my treat, but someone stole my thunder. Since we're brothers, I won't stand on ceremony. I'll make it up to you next time." The 4 of them came from influential families, so they had seen a lot of hypocrisy. Yu Qianqiu's frankness caused the 4 of them to become much closer. The 4 of them looked at each other and smiled. Bai Zitsong laughed. "We've eaten a lot of good stuff. But this is the first time we've had a banquet that costs 1,000 spiritual stones. That Yan Zhuixing. Ha! He admires Brother Yu a lot. Yeah. He just paid the bill and he's already helping me save money. His admiration is timely. But I think he admires the 4 of you too." Yu Qianqiu sighed and winked at the 4 of them. "It's so easy talking to smart people. Don't." Bai Zitsong waved his hand and smiled. "Our 4 families can't compare to your Fuxian Island. Such admiration should be left to Brother Yu alone. I'd rather be stupid. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep at night." The 4 of them burst into laughter. Only Xiong Hui smiled. He didn't know what the 5 of them were talking about and what they were laughing about. The 4 families also had shops in the 100 Flowers Valley. They didn't have to worry about not having a place to stay. They made an appointment with Yu Qianqiu to meet again next time and went their separate ways. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Xiong Hui, then at the 4 of them. He shook his head slightly. The next day, Quan Deming and the elders of the various sects were busy. No one knew what they were discussing. Yu Qianqiu spent some effort to get rid of Xiong Hui. He wandered around the market in the 100 Flowers Valley. He realized that it wasn't a bad thing that the Cultivation Alliance was located in the 100 Flowers Valley. If Utopia needed anything, he could purchase it here. They casually walked to a stall selling talismans. The stall owner was an old man with a smile on his face. Yu Qianqiu sized him up and discovered that he was actually still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm despite his age. He then pointed at the talisman papers on the stall and asked, "Did you make all the talisman papers here yourself?" The old man realized that he couldn't see through the cultivation of the young man in front of him. He immediately nodded and said yes. "How much are you selling these talismans?" Yu Qianqiu asked. The old man was stunned. He smiled apologetically. "Sir, you're mistaken. I only sell talismans here. I don't sell white talismans." Yu Qianqiu frowned. "Why not? Don't you want to earn spirit stones by setting up a stall?" The old man chuckled. "I won't hide it from you. I spend a lot of time and effort to make these talismans. If I offer a high price, you won't be happy. If I offer a low price, the profit will be too low." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and interrupted him. "Don't be long-winded. Name a price that you're willing to sell." "Since you said so, I'll tell you." The old man spread out 4 different colored talismans on the stall. Level 1 white talismans cost 10 low-grade spirit stones. Level 2 white talismans cost 1 low-grade spirit stone. Level 3 white talismans cost 1 mid-grade spirit stone. As for level 4 white talismans, you must know that the materials used are not ordinary. They cost 50 mid-grade spirit stones each. Yu Qianqiu understood that the material he was talking about was not ordinary. Normally, the talisman paper that could reach the standard of the 4th level was usually made from human skin and other materials that were good at guiding spirituality. However, the old man's price was not low. It was even higher than the talismans that Chen Feng sold here. It seemed that he wanted to make him back off. He could not help but frown. "I'll reduce the price of all white talismans by half. I'll take all of them." "Reduce by half. All of them?" the old man muttered as he twirled his beard. He looked at the thousands of white talismans on the stall and considered whether it was worth it to make a small profit but quick turnover. Yu Qianqiu also knew that his price was a little too high. However, when he talked to Chen Feng last night, Chen Feng told him that he needed a lot of white talismans to train his subordinates. He wanted him to think of a solution as soon as possible. Yu Qianqiu attached great importance to this matter. If he could train a group of talisman-making experts to provide logistical support for the army, it was worth it to spend more money. Fortunately, he was in the 100 Flowers Valley. It was not difficult to solve this problem. Seeing that he was still hesitating, Yu Qianqiu frowned. "This is the price. You don't have to think about it anymore. From today onwards, I'll take all of your white talismans. This is the deposit for tomorrow." He threw a high-grade spirit stone on the stall. "You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.